23-year-old Anita Raleigh lives a quiet life in the quaint Tampa suburb of Largo, Florida.
Anita was pretty. She was a very beautiful young lady, vivacious, outgoing, talented. She always had a real bright personality, a lot of fun, and pretty headstrong.
She's also religious.
Anita was the daughter of a minister, so she was brought up in a religious family.
Coincidentally, 21-year-old Luther Bass comes from a religious family too.
I met Luther when he came to visit my dad's church.
Hi. My name's Anita.
Luther Bass from Memphis.
He moved here to try out for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was an athletic-looking gentleman, very friendly and outgoing.
You work here?
This is my daddy's place.
Your daddy's place. That's pretty funny.
Why?
My daddy's a pastor too. May I?
Sure. Thank you.
I wasn't in the mindset of, oh my gosh, it's a guy, But, he was attractive. He was a nice-looking guy.
So, what's it like being a pastor's daughter?
What's it like being a pastor's son?
Anita may not be swooning, but she's definitely intrigued.
He seemed to be a real sincere, genuine guy, a Christian, with strong beliefs. Not just beliefs, but really, lived it.
No longer an aspiring football player, Luther has another passion.
He always liked building boats, and that's why he moved here to build boats.
With Thanksgiving around the corner, Anita invites 5 church friends over for dinner, including Luther.
I'm in the kitchen. I'm wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. I hadn't even gotten dressed, dressed. Luther shows up at the door in a 3-piece suit and tie.
Luther, hi.
Hope I'm not too early.
I was kind of stunned. I was surprised.
You're totally early, which means you're helping. Please, come in. Thank you. Beautiful.
I remember it being very enjoyable, just like a nice meal with friends. He wanted to take me out to dinner as a thank you for me inviting him to Thanksgiving.
The two start spending more and more time together. Anita's a stay-at-home mom to 18-month-old Jason, and Luther is thrilled.
Luther was willing, as a young man, to take on a woman with a child, which a lot of young men at his age would not do.
Luther takes to Jason as if Jason were his own, and Anita is impressed.
He seemed like somebody that would make a wonderful husband and a great father.
Anita and Luther tie the knot at her father's church, only months into their relationship.
He had a strong desire to be a good father and husband and provider. Anita, I think, had longed for something like that for a long time, and she found that in Luther.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell are cautiously optimistic about the couple.
The fact that Luther and Anita both come from the same background, being religious, could bode well for their relationship.
Unfortunately, the statistics are not good on the longevity of marriages when one of the partners already has a child, and it sounds like Luther is a guy who has maybe some overly rosy glasses on when he thinks about what it means to not only become a husband, but also become sort of an instant father.
I always say that it takes 6 to 8 months before the true self is revealed. And so what I worry about for them is that they're both going to change once they're already married, and they're going to discover things about each other that they didn't already know.
Less than 2 years later, Anita gives birth to Jessica, her first child with Luther. Their second daughter, Janet, soon follows, then a son, Michael.
I think of it fondly as the best time of my life. How much joy it was, just doing things with the kids, simple things. I just kind of soaked it all up.
Luther lets Anita take charge when it comes to the kids.
He loved his kids, but when Luther came home, it was like the 50s. Me, man, I want to sit in my recliner and read the paper, watch TV. You, woman, get the kids to bed.
While Anita copes with the kids, Luther focuses on his boat building business.
Yeah, okay.
Luther had somebody approach him to build a 53-foot catamaran yacht for him and his family.
I'm building a yacht. I'm building a freaking yacht!
With his family's full support, Luther's first order of business is finding a place to build that yacht.
You're working with fiberglass. There's a lot of environmental concerns. There wasn't really a place that we could find in Pinellas County because Pinellas County is pretty densely populated.
Luther finds what he's looking for, only it's 4 hours away.
Some acreage in North Florida with a 2,000 square foot warehouse and a 2-bedroom house that was fairly new.
Living in Steinhatchee, Florida, offers Luther and Jason, now 9, an opportunity to bond.
How many of your city slicker friends get to go shooting like this? Pretty cool, huh?
This is how rural it was. We literally could go outside in our backyard and set up targets like 100 yards away and shoot off rifles because there was no one to hit. And it was kind of fun, you know.
Luther also gets down to work building the yacht. But money is tight.
Sweetheart, I just need your signature.
We didn't have the money to pay somebody, so I ended up basically managing the business, doing the payroll, doing all the accounting.
It's not long before Steinhatchee's charms start wearing a bit thin.
It was a complete and total change, especially for me and Mom, because we're both very much like city people, and Steinhatchee is out in the middle of nowhere.
I did not like living in a rural area.
Why did he pick this place in which we have no friends or relatives or any resources or anything nearby? I have no idea.
And only months after he starts work, Luther makes a crushing discovery.
Luther, what's wrong?
The hull broke.
They completed 1 keel of a boat and a 53-foot long keel of a catamaran boat. The hull didn't kick off. So the hull was basically ruined.
The materials I bought weren't any good.
So it's the supplier's fault.
Probably cut a few corners I shouldn't have.
When you open a drum of material to use, you do a test panel just to make sure that the material's good. And Luther said he didn't do a test panel.
Luther!
Meaning his big payoff is in jeopardy.
So what now?
How should I know?
We ended up losing a hull of a boat, which was very expensive, and then we ended up having to file bankruptcy because of that. We lost the house, the warehouse, all of our property, everything.
Look, Anita, I'm sorry.
I want us to move back to Largo.
No, that's not happening.
Their relationship deteriorated.
I felt like my head was gonna explode.
It's not the only thing that's about to explode.
Anita had the upper hand, and Luther did not take well to that.
It was 2 bulls. She wasn't about to back down, and he wasn't either.
A bad decision costs Luther Bass his boat building business, and it might ruin his marriage to Anita, his wife of 9 years, and the mother of his 4 young children.
Living up there, you know, things were tense all of the time. The fights got worse, the tension grew.
They were in terrible financial straits.
This is supposed to be enough groceries for the week.
For the week? No, this is for the month. You're the one who got us stuck out here in the sticks without any income, not me. When are you just gonna admit your failures so we can move on?
Don't say that word to me.
Failure? Failure?
After months of fighting and drifting apart, there's only one thing Anita and Luther can agree on. They need a little time apart.
We had talked about it before, and it's just like, listen, neither one of us are happy. We just decided I was going to move back to Largo and take the kids with me. So that's what we did. And the guy that we were building the boat for bought our property, bought everything lock, stock, and barrel. So Luther stayed and helped him finish the boat.
Back in Largo, Anita gets a job in a fast food restaurant, but depends on Luther's financial assistance just to get by.
There was tension between Mom and Luther. There was financial stress.
But even with the stress, Luther makes a point of visiting as often as he can.
Every other weekend or something like that, he would come down to visit the kids. They were glad to see their dad because they knew they'd, get to go do something.
Dad!
That was his big thing. Take us and go have fun.
But Luther misses more than just his kids.
Hey, buddy. Any idea how to get your mom to take me back?
Did you try flowers?
And he's ready to make a big change.
Your mom's got to learn how to throw. I'm going to be a fireman.
A fireman?
I already passed the course and got a job.
He was interested in making a good home and being a good provider and taking care of the kids.
Well, Luther, I'm happy for you, but where is it, in Largo? Luther, it's this serious.
Boise.
Boise, Idaho. Luther, Boise's on the other side of the country. I mean, how's this supposed to work? They'll just send us money?
I'm going to take you all with me. Once I'm settled in, of course. Give it a chance.
His idea was to go out there, get established, and then send for Anita and the kids and have them join him, and life would be great in Idaho.
I'll think about it.
We had discussed that once he'd lived there for at least 6 months, let's talk about it then.
So Luther packs up and heads nearly 3,000 miles away in the hopes that it'll save his marriage. It doesn't.
Hey.
Only 6 months after he settles in Boise, Anita files for divorce.
He'd gone through all these efforts and to great lengths to make a good, stable home life for the family, and she didn't want any part of it. He felt as though he'd been betrayed.
Anita just can't get over the fear that Luther isn't ready to commit, both emotionally and financially.
I wasn't interested in, dating anybody or kicking my heels up. I mean, we had talked about it before, and I think it was inevitable that there would be a divorce in the future. And I met with an attorney, and the attorney said, if he files, I would have to hire an attorney in Idaho to file for a change of venue, which would just lengthen the process, obviously a lot more expense. So I just said, how much do I need to make the check out for?
I think it's always naive to think that you can save a relationship by leaving it.
My suspicion is that Anita knew when Luther left that she was going to file for divorce after a bit of time had passed, because in terms of getting custody of the children, it's a lot easier when the other parent has left the jurisdiction and is far away, and there really is no practicable way to share custody.
But Luther's not giving his kids up without a fight.
I'm not going to let you take the kids.
This has nothing to do with the kids, Luther. You're acting this way just to spite me. And you're not going to win.
Yeah? Just watch me.
Luther was making it very clear that he was going to get the kids and he was going to take us away.
The judge doesn't agree.
He was in Boise, so it's not like you could share residential custody on a weekly basis or revolving basis.
Luther got supervised visitation, so he only had the right to visit his kids 2 weeks a year.
Anita had the upper hand, and Luther did not take well to that.
This custody battle is about to get ugly.
Why would she attempt to break in and slash the screens?
She had some challenges to work out. She had some demons.
After a rocky 9 years of marriage, Anita Bass serves her husband Luther with divorce papers and wins sole custody of their 4 children in the process. As the children deal with the reality of the divorce, the new year brings new romantic prospects for Anita.
I had found out about Parents Without Partners, and they had a meeting on Friday nights where people could come find out about the organization, meet some of the members.
Enter local air conditioner repairman and recent divorcee, Keith Yunk.
I guess I should introduce myself. Hi, I'm Keith. And I've got 2 kids. And man, I love them, but I gotta say it's really nice. This is the first time I've had a night off in months. And I gotta say I'm loving it, so.
I mean, I was attracted to him. He's a nice looking guy, tall, you know, well built, all that. But I wasn't thinking, you know, go to Parents Without Partners, hopefully find somebody to date. That was the last thing in the world I was interested in.
But when the stars align, sometimes they can't be ignored.
So is this your first time?
First time here, or first time getting divorced? Sorry, I couldn't resist. It's first time for both.
Me too.
He was the type of person that made everybody feel good just being around him. He was very easy to talk to. He's very engaging. We spent as much time together as we could.
The way he treated her made her feel special, and she hadn't had that before, really. Not with Luther, anyway.
As I got to know him, I couldn't help but love him.
And Keith can't help but propose, only months after they meet.
I decided that, you know what? I'm ready to marry this man. What am I waiting for?
Anita's kids seemed to really take to Keith's kids right away, and apparently they blended very well.
We had a stable family life. We had good relationships.
But Luther isn't so happy.
Hello?
Luther, hi. I just want to let you know that I'm married.
Okay.
Is that all?
Well, what else do you want me to say?
All right, well, that's it then.
That was it. That was the end of it.
Luther isn't the only ex left out in the cold. So is Keith's former wife, Julie.
I think she struggled with the whole parenting challenge, and I'm not even sure she had a job. So she has no real way to care for these children. Who are you going to give custody to?
Keith's ex was supposed to have the kids over the weekends. However, she would tell him, you need to come pick up the kids.
Yeah?
I need you to take the kids. They're driving me crazy.
Look, Julie, come on, this is your weekend.
I need to do laundry.
I said, listen, you tell her the kids are portable. She needs to take the kids with her to do her laundry.
Sorry, Julie, you're on your own here.
Don't you dare tell me that I'm on...
And then, Anita and Keith wake up one summer morning to an altogether new annoyance.
It's just over here.
The screen had been jimmied and torn, and nothing else was disturbed. The police said, well, looks like a bungled burglary, and the guy just got spooked by a neighbor or something.
But that's not all.
Hey, what the heck happened over here?
Keith's like, Anita, the phone lines have been cut through.
That's not something that typically happens on a residential burglary, unless it's an alarm system. Somebody's trying to deactivate.
But nothing ever really came of it.
A month later, Luther shows up for a scheduled visit with his kids.
Hello, Luther.
Anita?
But Luther's not alone.
I look out and there's this monster truck and then a woman.
Thought I'd take the kids to Orlando.
Here he is in this camper with his new girlfriend, and he wants to just take us and go to Orlando for like 3 days or something, unsupervised.
That's not what the court decided.
So where are the kids?
Inside.
Well, will you go get them, please?
First of all, he didn't tell me that he was bringing her, and I'm just not comfortable. I don't know this woman.
Caught off guard, Anita needs time to think.
Why don't you take them to the beach while I pack their bags?
Fine. I'll take them to the beach then.
Your father's here!
Hey, guys, don't give Daddy a hug. Oh, yes. We're going to the beach. How about that? Let's go. How you been? Over here, guys.
With Luther and the kids at the beach, Anita seeks advice from 911.
She wondered whether his intentions were to bring the kids back.
Yes, I'm having some custody issues with my ex-husband.
I'm not going to take chances when it comes to my children. Ever.
Okay, ma'am. Do you need us to send someone over?
I don't think that's necessary. But I could use some advice.
She got some advice from an officer and decided to not allow him to take these kids for his vacation.
Thank you.
If he was really traveling across the country out of this overwhelming desire to spend time with these kids he hadn't seen in a while, why would he want to be splitting that time between his kids and the new girlfriend? It's disingenuous to me.
She gets to make the decisions. She gets to decide whether he gets to see them or not. And so if he had good intentions, then my hunch is he would have tried to coax her in a way that was mindful and planning oriented instead of this big, sort of bomb dropping.
Anita's about to drop a bomb of her own.
So they pull up. I had gotten a baseball bat and set it beside the front door.
That bat wasn't for Little League. That was for protection.
Kids, you all need to get in the house. Why? Don't make me ask you twice.
Watch some TV, okay? Set them up in the living room.
I'll try.
What's going on?
Anita starts asking questions.
On things like, where are you getting a hotel, how long are you going, etc., etc. And he just got really defensive and angry at all this.
If you wanted to spend time with the kids so much, why would you bring that woman with you?
That woman is my fiance.
I don't care who she is. You're not taking them anywhere.
The heck I ain't! Hey! Open this door! You have no right!
I have every right!
I'm calling the cops!
Go ahead! They already know.
I hope you're satisfied. Because this feeling, it won't last.
After he'd traveled all this way, I'm sure Luther was very, very disappointed.
And soon, disappointment will give way to tragedy.
Help!
Blood all over the sheets, all over the carpeting, everywhere.
It was shocking, really shocking.
When Luther Bass and his new fiancée show up to take Luther's kids on vacation, his ex-wife Anita calls it off for fear that he won't bring them back. Weeks pass, and Anita puts the incident behind her, focusing instead on life with her new husband, Keith.
Luther's 3,000 miles away, and it was nice because we had a taste of something new.
Back in Idaho, Luther focuses on the here and now.
I didn't hear anything from Luther. He did not reach out to us at all after that incident.
It seems like things have finally calmed down.
Those months that we had after that with Keith and his family, they were great. They're fun.
Until tragedy strikes. In the early hours of December 15th, 1991, first responders rushed to Anita's street.
Help!
They immediately took me to another house.
Can you tell us anything at all about what happened?
Something woke me up in the middle of the night. Whatever it was happening right outside my room. It was Keith.
Dad!
Battling with this guy all dressed in black. He was stabbing Keith with a knife. Mom was there too. Her throat had been slashed.
Keith was losing. He was just being stabbed to death.
She grabbed a baseball bat. She whacked him over the head with it, but he just kept coming. He just kept struggling.
Keith had a 357 that we all knew about.
But she just couldn't find it.
He ran because he didn't want to get shot. Mom came to the door and we looked at each other for a second. We heard the front door slam and we realized he was gone.
Call the police. Call the police.
I picked up the phone and I looked at her and just said, "The phone's dead."
I'll be right back.
She said, "Stay here with Keith."
Anita runs out and goes to the neighbor's house for help. And then the police come in. That's the next thing he knows.
Was there anything distinctive about this man?
I said he had a mask on, a ski mask or something. I think I saw his skin because there was a black area between the mask and the sweatshirt.
He was African American.
This gentleman's gonna take care of you, son.
News of the savage attack spreads fast.
I'll never forget it. It was just a moment in time which struck me. Everything was such a shock.
I pretty much collapsed to my knees after I learned about it.
When it comes to a motive, police are at a loss.
Could this be a home invasion? Could it be a robbery gone bad? This was somebody very angry with either Keith or Anita.
Investigators soon learn the phone line has been cut, just as it had in June. Was the June robbery a dry run to murder? One day into the investigation, a discarded ski mask is located on a golf course less than a mile from the crime scene.
Had blood on the mask, and it matched in general description what Jason had provided. Once the forensics came back on the ski mask, there were only hairs of Caucasian origin in that mask. We had kids in the neighborhood who had seen a white male running at 3 o'clock in the morning from the crime scene. And we were pretty well convinced that this attack in no way involved a black male.
He was African American.
Jason, at 12 years old, there may have been some discussion about, is it possible that he had something to do with this?
This gentleman's gonna take care of you, son.
Besides Jason, suspicion also falls on the exes, Luther and Julie.
We reached out to those spouses. We sent John Carroll up to Boise.
There you go.
Luther seemed very eager to help us.
So, you said you were elk hunting.
Yes, sir. Fired a few shots, but he got away.
He described how he had shot at an elk and missed the elk, so the rifle was dirty.
And you were hunting the whole time.
You can ask my fiancée. She'll tell you.
Luther's fiancée, Carrie, backs up his alibi. And so do the flight records.
We were looking at airline manifests to see if we could put Luther traveling to Florida or any of those sorts of things.
But we weren't able to put him on a flight.
We didn't have a lot to go on with Luther at that point.
Anita survives the attack.
Her recovery was very miraculous. She was stabbed, she was hit in the head with a roofing hatchet. I mean, she endured a lot of things. Any one of those could have been fatal, and they weren't. Keith took the brunt of everything. He had so many wounds. Each one were fatal.
Anita is released from the hospital 2 days later, happy to be alive, but devastated by her new reality as a widow.
Obviously, it's not a surprise. It's just like, please don't tell me this. So that's hard to take.
For Anita, it will be a long road to recovery.
There is the element of survivor guilt, of wondering how did she survive and not him, and wondering if she could have possibly helped him.
At the same time, she is called to sort of put that on the back burner and think about the fact that there were children in the home, one of whom saw that happen, and she's got to figure out how to be there for them and try to help them through the obvious trauma that they're gonna have.
And yet at the same time, she has to be incredibly relieved that she's still alive.
While Anita recovers, police continue the investigation. With Luther eliminated, Julie is next on the suspect list.
We did develop information that there may have been some animosity there on the part of Julie.
Julie is entitled to full custody of her kids after Keith dies, so she has motive. She also has an alibi. And to prove it, she takes and passes a polygraph test.
She had indicated that she and her husband were asleep with her kids, who she had visitation with that particular weekend.
Jason is also quickly eliminated as a suspect because of his age, size, and the savagery of the attack.
He was a young boy, 12 years old.
Dad!
It didn't seem logical.
It was ruled out, and it was quickly ruled out. Because the mask, the lower portion of the mask, was black, he was mistaken on the description of the suspect.
We were back to square one and going down the list of people who might have had motives.
Nobody would want to attack a sweet young couple like this and brutalize them so terribly. It's like, why so random? Why the violence?
Detectives soon discover it's anything but random.
He said Keith was a casualty of war.
What happened to Anita could happen to her.
Anita Young's second husband, Keith, is savagely murdered in their Florida home. Their exes, Luther and Julie, each have solid alibis, leaving the investigation at a standstill until the Largo PD gets a surprise break in the case.
I was at my desk in the police department one afternoon, and I had a phone call from Boise.
I started to suspect something when Luther shows up with a gash on the back of his head, and it was on the same day that Keith was killed.
Coincidence? Perhaps not.
Once he got back from his hunting trip, he asked her to look at an injury on his head.
Grab me some painkillers, will you?
She disclosed that she was aware of the previous trip that Luther had taken, the June before the murder.
Well, he's also been back to Florida more times than you know. It's just over here.
This was the same time frame as the attempted burglary to the residence.
I know what you're thinking.
Luther's mental state seemed to deteriorate.
You don't know what I've been through with that woman.
There were some tense moments between the two of them, and in one of those particular moments, he made an idle threat.
You know, you could end up just like her.
It's not solid evidence, but it's the best lead they've got.
And I'm getting really worried that he's going to make good on it.
Would have been hearsay at best, but it certainly seemed it was time to go.
Outside, it looked like he was, but to see this letter written from his kid who basically said, "You're not a good father," would take him on the emotional roller coaster, so to speak. He went silent, couldn't take his eyes off the letter.
At that point, it was just like a dam broke, and Luther told us the whole story.
He said he left home that Saturday morning, telling his girlfriend that he was going hunting. And he drove to Salt Lake City. This is about a 5-hour trip.
He decided to fly from Salt Lake City instead of Boise using an assumed name.
We were able to identify his fingerprints on this ticket that he turned over to the flight staff as he boarded the airplane. He got into Tampa late that Saturday night. He got into the backyard of the residence. His intent was to go inside, cut Anita's throat, and leave.
I felt the knife, and when I opened my eyes, I remember looking into his eyes, and it's like you're staring into nothing but just pure evil. Keith wakes up and pulled this guy off of me, and then they started struggling, fighting, slashing.
Luther told us that Jason yelled out, "Dad!
Dad!
Dad, are you all right?" And Luther thought he was talking to him.
But Jason is talking to Keith.
Dad!
Luther almost slipped up there. If he would have answered Jason, then obviously he would have been apprehended sooner. He said he was sorry that he had to kill Keith, but Keith was a casualty of war.
Get the gun!
When Luther is tried on first-degree murder charges in March 1993, he's sentenced to life in prison, plus 17 years.
Theoretically, he'll never get out, but I know Anita has lived in fear. I'm not sure that 25 years in prison has dulled his rage at all.
I know he uses the excuse, "I did it for my kids."
Dad!
But how can you claim to love me and then come in to our house and kill Keith in front of me? Slash Mom's throat in front of me. Make me endure that. Don't ever look me in the eyes and tell me you love me.
The primary driver of this was his rage against Anita for basically having bested him in the custody battle. And we can totally look back now and see that, yeah, this is not a guy who cares deeply about children and fathering and parenting or any of that. This is a guy who is a vengeful, rageful sociopath.
And he doesn't have any regard for the fact that he has children in there, that there's a another man in there. He just wants to accomplish his mission of going after his ex-wife.
To this day, Anita remains haunted by the thought of what might have been.
I never imagined I could ever be that happy. If Keith had lived, I think that after 24 years, it would still be that kind of love. I don't think that would have ever changed.
Thank you for watching Investigation.
The Pacific Ocean possesses a rhythm that dictates the lives of those who dwell upon its islands. In American Samoa, this rhythm is a constant, a heartbeat that has sustained generations of communities bound tightly by tradition, faith, and an unbreakable sense of kinship. Among these communities is the historic village of Leon. Nestled on the western coast of Tutuila, Leon is a place where the air is heavy with the scent of salt and tropical flora, where the sound of church bells mingles with the crashing of the waves against the volcanic rock. It is a village that prides itself on its history, its tranquility, and the deep, enduring connections between its families. In places like Leon, anonymity is a foreign concept. Every face is familiar, every lineage is known, and the community functions as an extended family. It is an environment that fosters safety and mutual support, a sanctuary shielded from the chaotic noise of the mainland world. But even sanctuaries have their vulnerabilities, and even the strongest walls can be breached not by forces from the outside, but from a silent, insidious rot growing within. This is a story about the shattering of that sanctuary. It is a profound tragedy that unfolded not in a dark alleyway or a stranger's home, but within the supposed safety of a family living room. The events that transpired in Leon in the year 2021 would tear the fabric of the community, leaving behind a wound that continues to ache. It is a narrative that forces us to look past the idyllic postcards of island life and confront a terrifying reality about the human mind, the destructive power of modern narcotics, and the devastating cost of societal silence. At the center of this tragedy is the Tafika family. To understand the sheer magnitude of the shock that would eventually consume Leon, one must first understand the position this family held within the village. The Tafikas were not merely residents, they were pillars of their community. They lived a life that many in the village aspired to, characterized by quiet dignity, unwavering faith, and a deep commitment to their neighbors. They were a deeply religious household, closely tied to the local church, participating in the communal rituals and obligations that form the backbone of Samoan social life. The patriarch, Tafika Sr., was a man whose very presence commanded respect. He was known as a gentle but firm guiding force, a father who had dedicated his life to providing for his family and upholding the moral standards expected of a man of his standing. Beside him was his wife, a woman whose quiet strength and devotion to her home made her a beloved figure among the villagers. Together, they had built a life that appeared, by all external measures, to be peaceful and secure. They were the kind of neighbors who would offer help before it was asked for, the kind of parishioners who formed the steady, reliable core of their congregation. In the collective consciousness of Leon, the Tafika household was an emblem of stability. However, the facade of perfect stability is often the most fragile. Beneath the surface of this respected, church-going family, a dark and invisible current was pulling beneath the calm waters. The threat did not come from a long-standing feud, a financial ruin, or a sudden external enemy. The threat was living under their own roof. It was their own son, Tafika Jr. The psychological barrier to comprehending parricide, the act of killing one's own parents, is immense. We are biologically and culturally conditioned to view the bond between parent and child as the most sacred and protective relationship in existence. A home is universally understood as the primary safe haven, the place where one retreats from the dangers of the world. For the Tafika family, their home was their sanctuary, filled with the history of their lives, the echoes of their prayers, and the warmth of their familial love. The idea that violent, fatal harm could manifest within those walls, perpetrated by the very child they had raised and nurtured, was an impossibility. It was a scenario so horrific that it defied the imagination of anyone in the village. Yet the impossibility became a gruesome reality. The mechanism of this destruction was not a sudden defect in character, but the introduction of an incredibly volatile catalyst into the young man's life. This catalyst was methamphetamine, commonly known as crystal meth. To fully grasp the context of this crime, we must zoom out from the Tafika household and examine the creeping epidemic that had been quietly infiltrating the isolated island communities of the Pacific. American Samoa, despite its geographical detachment, has not been immune to the global reach of synthetic narcotics. Methamphetamine is a substance that does not merely alter a person's mood. It fundamentally hijacks the brain's chemistry. It erodes the user's connection to reality, replacing it with a terrifying landscape of extreme paranoia, aggressive hallucinations, and profound delusions. When methamphetamine takes hold, the person who existed before is temporarily, and sometimes permanently, erased, replaced by an entity driven by chemical panic and raw, unrestrained survival instincts directed at phantom threats. In the case of Tafika Jr., the methamphetamine use acted as a match dropped into a powder keg of unaddressed psychological instability. The tragedy of his descent into darkness is compounded by the cultural context in which it occurred. In small, close-knit, and highly religious island communities like Leon, reputation is paramount. The collective perception of a family's honor and dignity carries immense weight. Because of this, issues that might tarnish that reputation, such as substance abuse or severe mental illness, are frequently shrouded in secrecy. There is a profound and stifling stigma attached to mental health struggles in such environments. Acknowledging that a family member is losing their grip on reality or falling victim to a devastating addiction is often viewed not as a medical crisis requiring external intervention, but as a moral failing or a source of deep familial shame. Families will go to extraordinary lengths to hide the problem, hoping that prayer, discipline, or simply ignoring the issue will make it disappear. This culture of silence is fatal. It prevents those who are suffering from receiving the psychiatric and medical help they so desperately need. It creates a vacuum where a ticking time bomb can quietly count down to zero, unseen and untreated, while the family desperately tries to maintain the illusion of normalcy to the outside world. The lack of specialized rehabilitation centers and accessible, stigma-free mental health support in these remote areas only solidifies the trap. The Tafika family, bound by their respectability and perhaps blinded by their love, found themselves trapped in this very dynamic. The signs of Tafika Jr.'s unraveling must have been present through erratic behavior, shifting moods, and a slow detachment from the reality his parents inhabited. But the immense pressure to maintain the family's pristine image, combined with a tragic lack of resources and understanding regarding the severe psychosis induced by methamphetamine, meant that the crisis was left unchecked. The parents were left to manage an unmanageable situation entirely on their own, behind closed doors. This perfectly constructed pressure cooker finally ruptured on a fateful evening in August 2021. The transition from a quiet island night to an unimaginably violent nightmare occurred without any warning. The evening began like countless others in the Leon village. The heat of the day had likely given way to the cooler ocean breezes. Families were retreating into their homes, settling down for the night. In the Tafika household, there was no indication of a brewing storm. There were no loud arguments echoing into the street, no escalating tensions that neighbors could hear and interpret as danger. The peace of the neighborhood remained entirely undisturbed until the very moment it was violently torn apart. The precise trigger for the eruption of violence may never be fully comprehended by a rational mind, because the mind that initiated it was no longer operating within the bounds of reality. Fueled by a severe, chemically induced acute psychotic break, Tafika Jr. completely lost touch with the world around him. In his mind, poisoned by the methamphetamine, his parents were no longer the loving figures who had raised him. They became the targets of an uncontrollable, explosive rage. When the local police dispatch received the desperate emergency call that evening, the urgency in the communication immediately signaled that something catastrophic had occurred. Officers were dispatched to the Tafika residence, navigating the familiar, quiet streets of Lyon, entirely unprepared for the scene they were about to encounter. The home of the respected church-going family, a beacon of tranquility in the village, had been transformed into an abattoir. The first responders who breached the threshold of the home were met with a visual and sensory assault that would forever scar their memories. The absolute brutality of the scene stood in grotesque defiance of everything the family represented. The violence had not been brief or hesitant. It had been absolute and overwhelming. It was a chaotic, bloody manifestation of a mind entirely consumed by delusion and rage. The officers stepping into the living room and the kitchen area were stepping into the immediate aftermath of a massacre. A stark and horrific testament to the destructive power of untreated mental illness and synthetic narcotics. In those initial, chaotic moments of discovery, the police had to process the impossible. The patriarch, the gentle and respected Tefika Sr., lay dead, having suffered a brutal and frenzied attack. His wife, clinging tenuously to life, lay severely wounded amidst the destruction of her own sanctuary. And the perpetrator of this unimaginable horror was not a stranger who had broken into the home under the cover of darkness. It was the son present amidst the carnage, his mind broken, his eyes empty, leaving a community to grapple with the horrifying realization that the monsters we fear the most are sometimes the ones we created a home for. This was the end of peace in Lyon and the beginning of a desperate search for understanding in the face of absolute madness. The aftermath of such an event leaves a permanent scar on the geography of a community. The Tefika house, once a symbol of familial warmth, instantly transformed into a monument of grief and horror. For the neighbors who lived just steps away, the realization that such extreme violence had occurred in total silence, mere meters from where they slept, shattered their fundamental sense of security. The illusion of safety, heavily relied upon in an island village where doors are rarely locked and trust is given freely, evaporated overnight. How could a son butcher his father with a knife while the village rested peacefully? How could the love of a mother not be enough to penetrate the chemical fog that had engulfed her child's brain? These questions highlight the insidious nature of the crisis. Methamphetamine does not announce its arrival with loud sirens. It creeps into communities through the shadows, often exploiting the very isolation that the islands cherish. It preys on the vulnerable, the bored, and the mentally fragile. Once it takes root in a person's nervous system, it begins a systematic dismantling of their humanity. The drug induces a state of hypervigilance and severe paranoia, convincing the user that they are in imminent danger. In this twisted reality, a loving parent asking a simple question can be perceived as a mortal threat requiring a lethal response. The tragedy of Tefika Jr. is that his actions, while monstrous, were driven by a brain that had been fundamentally broken by a toxic substance. The tragedy also forces a painful reckoning with the concept of unconditional love. The parents of Tefika Jr. likely saw the deterioration of their son. They likely witnessed his withdrawal, his erratic outbursts, and the fading light in his eyes. Yet, bound by the deeply ingrained cultural expectation to keep family matters private, and driven by a parent's desperate hope that their child will somehow find their way back, they shielded him from the outside world. They became his silent caretakers, unwittingly placing themselves in the direct path of the storm. Their love, which should have been their greatest strength, became their ultimate vulnerability. They refused to abandon their son, and in doing so, they paid the ultimate price. This case stands as a terrifying case study in true crime history, diverging from the typical narratives of greed, jealousy, or calculated malice. There was no financial gain to be had, no long-standing vendetta to settle. It was a crime born of pure, unadulterated chaos. It serves as a grim reminder that violence is not always a choice made by a rational mind, but sometimes a symptom of a profound sickness that has been ignored for too long. The blood spilled in the Lyon village that night was not just the blood of a respected father, but the lifeblood of a community's innocence, forever staining the legacy of the island and echoing a desperate warning to any society that chooses to look away from the creeping shadows of addiction and the silent suffering of the human mind. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of the tragedy that befell the Tefika family, One must first understand the profound cultural and geographical landscape in which their lives were so deeply rooted. The village of Leon, situated on the western coast of Tutula in American Samoa, is not merely a collection of houses dotting a tropical shoreline. It is a place heavily saturated with history, carrying the immense weight of legacy and tradition. In the context of the South Pacific, Leon is historically significant as one of the early landing sites for Christian missionaries. This historical fact is crucial because it embedded a deep, unshakable foundation of faith into the very soil of the village. The church is not just an institution in Leon. It is the absolute center of gravity around which all social, familial, and personal lives revolve. The rhythm of the village is dictated by the ringing of church bells, the cadence of evening prayers, and the collective gatherings that solidify the bonds of the community. In such an environment, an individual's identity is inextricably linked to their family lineage and their standing within this tightly knit religious framework. Within this profoundly traditional and deeply pious community, the Tufiga family stood as a paragon of civic and moral virtue. They were not newcomers or outsiders trying to carve out a space for themselves. They were an integral part of the village fabric. Tufiga Sr., the patriarch of the family, was a man whose reputation was built on decades of quiet, consistent integrity. In Samoan culture, the concept of respect and honor, often tied to family and elders, is paramount. Tufiga Sr. embodied these ideals perfectly. He was known throughout Leon as a gentle, hardworking, and profoundly peaceful man. His authority within his home and his influence within the community were not derived from intimidation or wealth, but from a wellspring of moral fortitude and unwavering dedication to his loved ones. He was the kind of father who provided not just material sustenance, but a spiritual and emotional anchor for his household. His neighbors viewed him as a steady hand, a man whose word could be trusted and whose presence brought a sense of calm reliability to any gathering. Beside him stood his wife, a woman who equally embodied the traditional virtues expected of a matriarch in a respected Samoan family. Although her specific name might fade into the broader narrative of the tragedy, her role and her essence are vital to understanding the depth of the loss. She was the nurturing core of the Tufiga household, a woman of immense strength and boundless devotion. Her life was largely defined by her service to her family and her active, visible participation in the local church community. In villages like Leon, a mother's influence extends far beyond the walls of her own home. She is a caretaker of the community's moral standards, a participant in the collective upbringing of the village youth, and a steady presence in times of local celebration or mourning. Together, Tufiga Sr. and his wife had cultivated a life that was universally admired by their peers. They were the very definition of a peaceful, law-abiding, and deeply loving couple. Their home was widely considered a sanctuary, a place where the chaotic forces of the outside world were held at bay by the sheer force of their faith and their commitment to one another. This pristine reputation, however, carried with it an invisible and ultimately fatal burden. To live as a pillar of the community in a closed island society is to live under a constant, unspoken microscope. In places like Leon, anonymity is entirely non-existent. Every triumph is celebrated collectively, but conversely, every failing, every internal struggle is subject to the intense scrutiny of communal observation. This dynamic creates a powerful sociological phenomenon where the preservation of a family's good name becomes almost as critical as life itself. The concept of saving face and protecting the family lineage from the stain of public shame is a driving force in daily decision-making. When a family is universally respected, the pressure to maintain that facade of perfection can become an incredibly isolating force, especially when severe internal crises arise. This is the critical intersection where the tragic fate of the Tufiga family began to seal itself. The internal crisis they faced did not come in the form of an external enemy, a financial collapse, or a natural disaster, which are hardships the community is well equipped to handle collectively. Instead, the crisis manifested within the mind of their own son, Tufiga Jr. As he began his descent into the dark, chaotic abyss of methamphetamine addiction, his parents found themselves entirely unequipped to navigate the horror unfolding beneath their own roof. Methamphetamine is not a drug that allows for functional, quiet addiction. It is a profoundly destructive chemical that rapidly induces severe psychological trauma, paranoia, and violent psychosis. As the drug began to hijack their son's brain, fundamentally altering his personality and eroding his connection to reality, his parents were undoubtedly forced to witness a terrifying transformation. Yet, rather than seeking outside intervention, the Tufika family likely fell victim to the powerful stigma that surrounds mental health and substance abuse in such deeply traditional communities. In the context of a highly religious, reputation-conscious village, acknowledging that a son has become addicted to a devastating synthetic narcotic and is suffering from acute, dangerous mental instability is an admission of profound defeat. It is often perceived not as a medical emergency requiring clinical intervention, but as a moral failing, a spiritual deficiency, or a deeply shameful secret that must be hidden at all costs to protect the family's honor. The fear of judgment, the dread of becoming the subject of village gossip, and the profound lack of understanding regarding the neurochemical realities of severe addiction created a wall of silence around the Tufika home. Furthermore, this silence was compounded by a tragic logistical reality. Small, remote island communities like Leon severely lack the specialized infrastructure necessary to handle acute psychiatric crises or intense chemical dependency. There were no readily available, stigma-free rehabilitation centers or specialized mental health crisis units that the parents could quietly turn to. They were left completely alone on an isolated island, armed only with their faith, their parental love, and a desperate, heartbreaking hope that they could somehow manage the situation internally. They attempted to contain a chemical wildfire with the tools of traditional family discipline and prayer, unaware that the substance consuming their son had rendered him entirely impervious to reason, love, or spiritual guidance. The sheer contrast between the lives Tufika Sr. and his wife led and the manner of their ultimate demise is the element of this case that continues to haunt the collective psyche of the community. They had spent their entire lives building a haven of peace, only to be slaughtered within it. They had dedicated themselves to the teachings of their church, embracing pacifism and community service, only to face a terrifying manifestation of pure, unadulterated violence. The home that had seen decades of family dinners, quiet prayers, and the gentle rhythms of island life was destined to become a slaughterhouse. The very walls that were meant to protect them from the world became the boundaries of an inescapable trap. It is essential to dwell on this profound contrast to truly honor the victims and to understand the absolute shockwave that this event sent through American Samoa. This was not a family that lived on the fringes of society. They were not involved in illicit activities, nor did they have a history of domestic disturbances that might have served as a warning sign to local law enforcement. To the outside observer, looking at their well-kept home and observing their regular attendance at Sunday services, the Tufika family was the picture of Pacific Island tranquility. This facade of serenity makes the reality of their final moments all the more agonizing to contemplate. Imagine the psychological torment of the parents in the weeks and months leading up to the tragedy. They were trapped in a horrifying duality. By day, they had to wear the mask of the respected village elders, exchanging pleasantries with neighbors and fulfilling their communal obligations. By night, they retreated into a home where the atmosphere was likely thick with tension, fear, and the unpredictable. Terrifying behavior of a son whose mind was slipping further into a methamphetamine-induced psychosis. Their love for him, their desperate desire to protect him from the harsh judgment of the law and the community, inadvertently created the very conditions for their own destruction. They became the sole caretakers of an extraordinarily dangerous individual, essentially serving as a barrier between his descending madness and the outside world. The profile of Tufika Sr. and his wife is fundamentally a profile of tragic, misplaced sacrifice. They were victims of their own unwavering commitment to their family and their societal norms. Their inability to break the silence, to shatter the taboo surrounding mental health and addiction, was not born of malice or negligence, but of a deeply ingrained cultural conditioning and a profound, blinding parental love. They believed, as many parents do, that they could save their child through sheer endurance and devotion. They did not understand that the son they loved had been entirely eclipsed by the neurochemical storm of synthetic narcotics. When we look at the victims of the Lyon tragedy, we must see them not just as names in a police report, but as the embodiment of a community's highest ideals, ultimately destroyed by a modern poison that the community was entirely unprepared to fight. Their deaths serve as a devastating indictment of the culture of silence that allows mental illness and severe addiction to fester in the shadows. The peaceful, religious, and highly respected lives they led stand in stark, horrific relief against the brutal, bloody reality of their final evening, making the case of the Tufika family one of the most uniquely heartbreaking and sociologically complex tragedies in modern true crime history. The village of Lyon lost not only two of its most beloved residents, but also its innocents, forced forever to reconcile the idyllic image of island life with the terrifying capacity for violence that can grow silently within the most respected of homes. The transition from the warm, humid afternoon to the heavy, still night in the historic village of Lyon is a gradual, almost imperceptible surrender to absolute tranquility. As the sun dips below the vast expanse of the Pacific horizon, it paints the island sky in fleeting, bruised shades of deep purple and violent orange before finally giving way to an encompassing, isolating darkness. In American Samoa, the nighttime hours bring a very specific, profound kind of quiet. This silence is punctuated only by the rhythmic, ceaseless crashing of the ocean waves against the distant, jagged volcanic rocks and the localized, familiar sounds of the village slowly settling into its nocturnal routine. Families traditionally gather within the secure, familiar confines of their homes, sharing their evening meals, reciting their nightly prayers, and finding deep solace in the collective, unspoken safety of their tightly knit, isolated community. On this particular evening in August of the year 2021, the Tufika household appeared, from every conceivable outside perspective, to be participating in this very same, entirely predictable ritual of domestic peace. The warm, inviting glow of artificial light spilling from their windows onto the surrounding tropical foliage offered absolutely no hint of the unimaginable, catastrophic terror that was actively gestating within their walls. There was no outward indication whatsoever that the safe sanctuary, meticulously constructed and maintained by Tufika Sr. and his devoted wife over decades of unwavering faith and community service, was about to be violently, irreversibly desecrated. The air surrounding the property was entirely still, devoid of the raised voices, the slamming doors, or the escalating, audible tensions that typically serve as the dark prelude to an act of severe domestic violence. This chilling absence of any preliminary warning is perhaps the most deeply disturbing aspect of the entire tragedy. The violence that was about to unfold did not build gradually through a series of escalating arguments or a protracted, visible family conflict. It arrived with the sudden, devastating, and entirely unpredictable force of a catastrophic lightning strike in an otherwise clear, cloudless sky. To even begin to understand the mechanics of this sudden, unprovoked eruption of extreme violence, one must directly confront the terrifying, biological reality of severe methamphetamine-induced psychosis. This specific condition is not merely a state of heightened emotional distress, a temporary lapse in rational judgment, or a sudden burst of standard anger. It is a total, absolute, and chemical severance from objective reality. Inside the tragically altered mind of Tufika Jr., the peaceful, familiar surroundings of his family living room were no longer perceived as a place of comfort or safety. Instead, his surroundings had likely morphed into a terrifying landscape of imminent, mortal threat. The synthetic narcotic, having systematically dismantled his brain's natural defense mechanisms and logical pathways, flooded his central nervous system with an overwhelming, artificial, and highly toxic surge of adrenaline, accompanied by profound, inescapable paranoia. In this state of acute, chemically driven psychotic delirium, the familiar, loving faces of his parents, the very same individuals who had nurtured him from infancy and offered him their unconditional support, were monstrously distorted into unrecognizable, entirely hostile entities. He was no longer operating as a son interacting with his deeply religious family. He had been reduced to a trapped, panicked organism reacting to horrifying, vivid hallucinations that felt completely, undeniably real to his poisoned, fractured consciousness. The serene silence of the island house was not a calming presence to him. It functioned as a blank canvas upon which his severely drug-addled brain aggressively projected unspeakable, invisible, and lethal dangers. The tragic decision to initiate a physical strike was not born of any premeditated, calculated malice, nor was it driven by any desire for financial gain or territorial dominance. It emerged solely from a deeply distorted, catastrophic survival instinct triggered by a false reality that existed entirely within the isolated confines of his own broken mind. The complete absence of any prior verbal altercation, as explicitly noted by the investigators who later analyzed the timeline, tragically confirms that the sole catalyst for the impending massacre was entirely internal, a silent, invisible switch flipped by the toxic, synthetic substance relentlessly coursing through his bloodstream. The terrifying transition from a state of absolute, domestic stillness to a theater of extreme, lethal violence occurred within a mere fraction of a second. The exact, precise sequence of the physical movements, known permanently only to the victims who suffered them and the perpetrator who enacted them, paints a horrifying picture of a frenzied, entirely uncontrollable assault that violently swept through the very core of the family home. The weapon utilized in the attack, a knife, was instantly transformed from a mundane, everyday household implement into an instrument of blind, chaotic, and maximum destruction. It was wielded by a man who was currently possessing the terrifying, unnatural physical strength and boundless stamina frequently associated with individuals experiencing severe methamphetamine intoxication. Tafika Sr., a man whose entire existence was defined by his gentle demeanor, his community leadership, and his unwavering religious faith, found himself the primary, immediate target of this sudden, explosive, and entirely unprovoked rage. The physical attack upon the elderly patriarch was incredibly concentrated, unthinkably brutal, and overwhelmingly fast. Subsequent, highly detailed forensic analysis of the aftermath would later reveal the presence of multiple, deep, and forcefully penetrating stab wounds that were focused almost entirely on the upper regions of the victim's body, specifically targeting the highly vulnerable chest and neck areas. These are distinct anatomical regions that medically indicate an undeniable underlying intent not merely to injure, to warn, or to incapacitate, but to inflict catastrophic, immediate, and definitively fatal harm upon the target. The sheer, overwhelming number of the inflicted wounds, combined with their severe depth and traumatic placement, tell a truly harrowing, heartbreaking story of a victim who was afforded absolutely no physical opportunity to defend himself, no time to attempt to reason with his crazed attacker, and likely no cognitive time to even fully comprehend the horrific reality that his own flesh and blood was actively bringing about his violent, bloody end. Tafika Sr. collapsed and ultimately perished within the very same living room where he had likely spent countless, peaceful hours reading Holy Scripture and presiding over his beloved family. His dignified life permanently extinguished in a horrifying, chaotic burst of drug-fueled, unrecognizable madness. Tragically, the sheer carnage of the assault did not remain geographically contained within the initial boundaries of the main living area. The violence, operating much like a chaotic, uncontrollable, and highly destructive force of nature, aggressively spilled outward, rapidly consuming the adjacent, functional spaces of the family residence. The kitchen area, traditionally serving as the warm, beating heart of any Samoan household, a sacred place heavily associated with the preparation of daily nourishment, joyous family gatherings, and communal sharing, was instantly, violently transformed into a secondary, equally horrifying theater of brutality. It was within this space, or perhaps during a desperate, panic-stricken trajectory toward it in a futile attempt to seek refuge or summon assistance, that Tafika Jr.'s mother directly encountered the inescapable, monstrous wrath of her own deeply disturbed child. The specific details of the physical attack leveled against her heavily underscore the indiscriminate, merciless, and entirely unfeeling nature of a human mind that has been fully, completely possessed by an advanced state of chemical psychosis. She suffered extremely catastrophic, life-threatening physical injuries, her fragile body subjected to the very same frenzied, unstoppable, and wildly aggressive violence that had just moments prior successfully claimed her husband's life in the adjacent room. She ultimately collapsed onto the hard surface of the floor within her own beloved home, heavily traumatized, experiencing profound physiological shock, and bleeding profusely from her sustained wounds. She was instantly reduced to fighting a desperate, agonizing, and highly precarious internal battle for her own basic survival, lying completely helpless amidst the unimaginable, bloody wreckage of what was once her secure family sanctuary. The physical, architectural space of the entire house, spanning continuously from the heavily compromised living room directly into the shattered kitchen area, became a single, continuous, and deeply horrifying crime scene. Every surface was heavily stained and permanently marked with the grim, undeniable biological evidence of a senseless massacre that had completely unfolded in a matter of terrifying, chaotic, and irreversible minutes. It was either during the very apex of this explosive violence or immediately following its devastating conclusion that the outside, oblivious world was finally, jarringly alerted to the unfolding island nightmare. A frantic, highly distressed communication finally reached the secure consoles of the local law enforcement dispatch center, instantly and violently shattering the routine, predictable calm of the standard night shift. The incredibly urgent nature of the received report, which detailed a severe, ongoing domestic disturbance featuring the high probability of critical, multiple casualties, immediately triggered a massive, high-priority emergency response protocol. Local police officers, professional individuals who were deeply, intimately familiar with the tight-knit, interconnected community of Lyon, and who very likely knew the highly respected Tafika family by their sterling reputation if not through direct, personal acquaintance, rushed their vehicles toward the reported residential address. The tense, high-speed journey navigating through the quiet, heavily shadowed, and seemingly peaceful streets of the sleeping village stood in stark, surreal, and highly disturbing contrast to the chaotic, bloody destination that awaited them at the end of their route. As their patrol vehicles rapidly approached the perimeter of this specific property, the profound, heavy silence of the surrounding tropical neighborhood remained entirely intact, offering absolutely no auditory clues or warnings regarding the extreme, fatal devastation that was resting silently inside the structure. It was only upon physically approaching the exterior structure, forcefully breaching the main threshold of the quiet home, and stepping inside that the true, staggering, and mind-altering magnitude of the tragic event fully revealed itself to the shocked first responders. The immediate sensory impact of physically entering the Tafika residence was universally described by those present as being nothing short of a waking, visceral nightmare. The immediate, overpowering, and distinctly metallic scent of freshly spilled human blood hung incredibly heavy and thick in the warm, stagnant, unmoving air of the enclosed house. The visual reality that confronted the officers was even more incomprehensible and deeply disturbing than the olfactory shock. Law enforcement personnel were immediately forced to carefully navigate a familiar domestic living space that had been entirely, violently redefined by an act of extreme, unrestrained physical aggression. The flooring, the interior walls, and the previously comforting, familiar pieces of household furniture were heavily, indiscriminately marked by the chaotic, bloody reality of a desperate, one-sided struggle for life. In the immediate center of this localized devastation, the officers quickly located the prone, motionless body of Tafika Sr. A rapid, professional assessment confirmed that the horrific, deeply traumatic nature of his sustained stab wounds left absolutely no room for any viable, life-saving medical intervention. The respected patriarch was definitively, tragically deceased at the scene. Nearby, situated amidst the rapidly expanding, highly contaminated perimeter of the crime scene that stretched continuously into the destroyed kitchen space, they located his grievously wounded wife. She was in an incredibly critical, highly unstable medical condition, hovering visibly on the absolute, terrifying precipice of imminent death, yet miraculously, she was still managing to cling to a faint, incredibly fragile, and shallow thread of human life. She remained present in the room as a living, breathing, and deeply suffering testament to the sheer, unadulterated brutality of the sudden attack, urgently requiring immediate, desperate, and highly specialized medical evacuation from the compromised scene. However, the single most chilling and psychologically disturbing element of the entire horrific environment was not the tragic presence of the deceased father or the agonizing suffering of the dying mother. It was the continued physical presence of the perpetrator himself. Tafika Jr. had not utilized the darkness to flee the immediate area or attempt to escape into the dense island foliage. Instead, he remained entirely stationary within the blood-soaked, ruined confines of the very home he had just single-handedly destroyed. When he was finally directly confronted by the heavily armed, arriving law enforcement officers, his outward demeanor offered a terrifying, crystal-clear glimpse directly into the bottomless, illogical abyss of his severe methamphetamine-induced psychosis. He was visibly, entirely unmoored from any recognizable concept of shared reality. His eyes, heavily described by witnesses as being deeply vacant, completely glassy, and hauntingly empty, simply stared blankly through the commanding officers. His facial expression registered absolutely no cognitive comprehension of the massive, bloody atrocity he had just successfully committed, nor did he show any recognition or respect for the distinct, heavily armed authority of the overwhelming police presence now surrounding him. There was no visible realization of his actions, absolutely no display of human remorse, and zero underlying understanding of the immense, permanent consequences of his extreme violence. However, this deeply unsettling, blank psychological detachment was simultaneously coupled with an extreme, highly volatile, and dangerously unpredictable physical aggression. As the trained law enforcement officers tactically moved forward to secure the dangerous area and forcefully apprehend the suspect, Tafika Jr. immediately reacted with the raw, chaotic, and unthinking hostility that is completely characteristic of an individual whose central nervous system is totally, hopelessly overwhelmed by highly potent synthetic stimulants. The tense, physical process of successfully taking him into official state custody was fraught with extreme, life-threatening tension, requiring multiple officers to physically wrestle and ultimately subdue a remarkably strong man who was currently operating entirely outside all known, acceptable boundaries of rational human behavior. His ultimate, forceful apprehension officially marked the definitive end of the immediate, physical, and bloody violence of the evening, but it was merely the very beginning of the long, devastating, and deeply painful aftermath. As the suspect was finally led forcefully away from the ruined property, heavily restrained and remaining violently, vocally unstable, he permanently left behind a completely shattered family lineage, a totally decimated physical home, and a grieving, deeply traumatized village community that would very soon be forced to wake up to a cold, harsh reality that was far more terrifying, complex, and painful than any horrific nightmare they could have ever possibly imagined. The immediate aftermath of the tragedy in Lyon was characterized by a profound, heavy silence that seemed to suffocate the village as the first rays of dawn began to touch the volcanic peaks of Tutuila. While the physical violence had been contained by the arrest of Tafika Jr., the investigative phase was only just beginning, and it would prove to be a painstaking journey into the heart of a family's hidden suffering. For the local detectives and forensic specialists assigned to the case, the Tafika residence was no longer a home but a complex, high-stakes puzzle of biological evidence and psychological trauma. The initial stage of the investigation focused on the meticulous documentation of the crime scene, a process that required hours of careful movement through a space that had been violently redefined by blood and chaos. Investigators moved through the living room and into the kitchen, their cameras flashing against the backdrop of a domestic life interrupted. They noted the placement of every item, from the religious iconography on the walls to the mundane household objects that now sat in pools of drying blood. This physical mapping was essential because it told a story that the suspect, in his current state of methamphetamine-induced psychosis, could not or would not articulate. The forensic analysis of the scene provided the first concrete clues into the nature of the attack. One of the most striking observations made by the lead investigators was the complete lack of defensive wounds on Tafika Sr. This detail was significant. It suggested that the patriarch had been attacked with such sudden, overwhelming force that he had no time to raise his hands or attempt to parry the blows. The autopsy report later confirmed that the wounds were concentrated in the chest and neck, areas that are biologically critical and difficult to protect during a surprise assault. The sheer number of stab wounds pointed to a phenomenon known in criminal psychology as overkill. In cases of overkill, the perpetrator continues to strike long after the victim has been incapacitated or has passed away. For the detectives, this was a clear indicator of a high-intensity emotional or chemical frenzy. It was not the work of a cold, calculating killer looking to eliminate a target efficiently. It was the work of someone who had completely lost control of their impulses, driven by internal rage or a terrifying delusion that demanded total annihilation of the perceived threat. As the forensic teams worked inside the house, another team of investigators began the difficult task of canvassing the Leon community. In a village where everyone is connected, this process was fraught with emotional complexity. The detectives interviewed neighbors who lived within earshot of the Tafika home, searching for any reports of shouting, glass breaking, or signs of an escalating argument in the hours leading up to the massacre. The results of these interviews were consistently baffling. Not a single neighbor reported hearing a dispute. There were no accounts of long-standing family feuds or recent public displays of hostility. The portrait that emerged from the community was one of a family that was almost unnervingly peaceful. This created a significant investigative hurdle. Without a clear, external motive like a financial dispute or a known history of domestic abuse, the detectives had to look deeper into the internal dynamics of the household. They had to find the invisible friction that had finally ignited into a lethal fire. The turning point in the investigation came when the focus shifted toward the medical and social history of Tafika Jr. While the family had maintained a pristine public image, the detectives began to uncover a different reality behind closed doors. Through discreet interviews with distant relatives and close associates of the son, a pattern of deteriorating behavior began to surface. It was revealed that Tafika Jr. had been struggling with substance abuse for some time, specifically a growing dependence on methamphetamine. This discovery changed the entire trajectory of the case. The investigation was no longer just about a murder. It was about the intersection of a pervasive drug epidemic and a family's desperate attempt to manage a crisis in secret. Detectives began to piece together a timeline of the suspect's descent, noting that his behavior had become increasingly erratic and paranoid in the months preceding the attack. However, because of the deep-seated cultural stigma surrounding addiction and mental health in the Samoan community, these warning signs had stayed within the walls of the Tafika home. The toxicology report for Tafika Jr. served as the definitive piece of scientific evidence that bridged the gap between his character and his actions. The results confirmed the presence of a high concentration of methamphetamine in his system at the time of the arrest. For the investigators, this was the missing link. They consulted with medical experts to understand how such a potent stimulant would have interacted with the suspect's brain. The experts explained that chronic methamphetamine use can lead to a state of acute psychosis characterized by vivid auditory and visual hallucinations and intense paranoia. In this state, the user often perceives their closest loved ones as mortal enemies or demonic figures. This explained the lack of a traditional motive. Tafika Jr. didn't kill his father because of a grievance. He killed him because his brain had been chemically hijacked into believing that he was acting in self-defense against a phantom threat. This realization added a layer of profound tragedy to the case, as it suggested that the very love and protection the parents offered had placed them in the direct path of a chemical storm. The investigation then moved into the technicalities of the weapon. The knife used in the attack was recovered at the scene, and forensic technicians worked to match the blade to the specific injuries sustained by both victims. They examined the handle for fingerprints and DNA, though the presence of the suspect at the scene made his involvement undeniable. What was more important to the investigators was the origin of the weapon. Finding that it was a common kitchen knife further reinforced the theory of a spontaneous, drug-fueled eruption. There was no evidence of premeditation in the sense of a pre-purchased weapon or a carefully laid trap. Instead, it appeared that Tafega Jr. had simply grabbed the nearest available tool during his psychotic break. This spontaneity made the crime even more terrifying for the community, as it highlighted how quickly a mundane domestic setting could turn into a slaughterhouse without any preparation or warning. Another critical step in the investigation involved the survival of the mother. While she was initially unable to speak due to the severity of her injuries and the state of medical shock, her eventual recovery provided a potential for first-hand testimony. Investigators had to wait for medical clearance before they could even attempt to approach her. When they finally did, the process was handled with extreme sensitivity. Her accounts, though fragmented by trauma, confirmed the suddenness of the event. She described a scene where there was no chance for negotiation or de-escalation. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle, but for the detectives, her condition was also a harrowing piece of evidence regarding the suspect's state of mind. The fact that he had attacked his mother with the same lethal intent as his father underscored the total loss of his moral compass during the episode. As the case moved toward the prosecution phase, the investigators had to reconcile the two versions of Tafega Jr. On one hand, there was the son of a respected family, a young man who had grown up in the church and was known to be part of a loving home. On the other hand, there was the individual in the police holding cell, who remained violently unstable for days after his arrest. Officers guarding him reported that he continued to experience bouts of aggression and appeared to be talking to people who weren't there. This persistent state of instability made it difficult for the legal teams to even conduct basic interviews. The investigation had to account for this prolonged psychosis, as it would be central to the upcoming legal proceedings regarding his mental competency to stand trial. The detectives meticulously documented his behavior in custody, providing a clear record of his mental state as the drugs slowly began to leave his system, leaving behind a man who would eventually have to face the wreckage he had caused. The investigation also touched upon the broader societal implications of the case. Detectives working the Leon tragedy found themselves looking at the supply chains of methamphetamine into the islands. They realized that the Tafega case was not an isolated incident of violence, but a symptom of a much larger, encroaching ghost that was haunting American Samoa. This led to a secondary investigation into local drug trafficking rings, as the authorities sought to understand how a young man from such a stable background could gain such easy access to a life-destroying substance. While this didn't change the facts of the murder, it provided a necessary context for why the violence had occurred in the first place. The investigation became a catalyst for a wider conversation between law enforcement and community leaders about the need for better surveillance of the borders and more robust support systems for families dealing with addiction. By the time the investigation was nearing its conclusion, the detectives had built a mountain of evidence. They had the forensic mapping of a brutal crime scene, the autopsy reports detailing the frenzy of the attack, the toxicology results confirming the role of methamphetamine, and the heart-wrenching accounts from a village in mourning. They had successfully peeled back the layers of a family's private struggle, revealing a story of a ticking time bomb that had been ignored due to shame and a lack of resources. The end or the knot of the investigation was finally untied. It was the realization that in the absence of specialized care and open communication, even the strongest of families can be dismantled from within. The investigators had done their job of documenting the how and the what, but the why remained a haunting indictment of a system that failed to catch a young man before he crossed the point of no return. As the file was handed over to the prosecutors, the investigators knew that while the evidence was airtight, there was no sense of victory. There was only the grim satisfaction of having brought the facts to light, leaving the village of Leon to begin the long, painful process of trying to understand an act of violence that defied every tradition they held dear. The legal proceedings following the tragedy in Lyon moved with a heavy, somber deliberation that mirrored the grief-stricken state of the entire island. When the case of the territory of American Samoa versus Tefika Jr. finally entered the halls of the High Court in Pago Pago, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that was both legal and deeply personal. In a small jurisdiction where the judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys often share communal ties, the clinical nature of the law was forced to coexist with the raw, bleeding emotions of a community that felt every blow of the knife as if it were a collective wound. The transition from the chaotic, blood-stained living room in Lyon to the sterile, mahogany-clad environment of the courtroom represented a shift from the madness of a drug-induced night to the cold, unforgiving light of accountability. For Tefika Jr., this was the beginning of a long journey through a system designed to determine not just what he had done, but whether he possessed the mental capacity to be held responsible for the destruction of his own family. The initial phase of the judicial process was dominated by the critical question of mental competency. Before a trial could proceed, the court had to determine if the defendant truly understood the nature of the charges against him and if he could effectively participate in his own defense. This was not a simple task. Following his arrest, Tefika Jr. had remained in a state of profound psychological instability, a lingering after-effect of the massive chemical trauma inflicted upon his brain by methamphetamine. Reports from the correctional facility suggested a man who was often lost in the fog of his own mind, alternating between periods of catatonic silence and sudden, inexplicable bursts of agitation. The court-ordered psychiatric evaluations became the primary focus of the early hearings. Specialized medical professionals were brought in to peel back the layers of his psychosis, attempting to discern where the influence of the drug ended and his baseline personality began. These evaluations were conducted in a climate of intense public scrutiny, as the village of Lyon waited to see if the man who had killed his father would be treated as a criminal or a patient. During these competency hearings, the physical appearance of Tefika Jr. in the courtroom served as a jarring reminder of the tragedy's human cost. Gone was the frenzied, vacant-eyed individual described by the first responders on that August night. In his place sat a young man who appeared diminished, his shoulders slumped and his gaze often fixed on the floor. For the members of the community who attended the sessions, seeing him in this state was a complex emotional experience. There was an undeniable urge to see justice served for the beloved Tefika Sr. Yet there was also the haunting realization that the person standing in the dock was the son of a family they had once deeply respected. The legal arguments centered on the neurobiology of addiction and the specific ways in which methamphetamine erodes the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for impulse control and moral reasoning. The defense sought to establish that the level of intoxication was so severe that it constituted a temporary loss of sanity, while the prosecution maintained that the voluntary ingestion of a controlled substance did not absolve an individual of the ultimate consequences of their actions. As the court eventually moved toward the actual trial and sentencing phase, the prosecution laid out a case that was as much a forensic reconstruction as it was a moral indictment. The evidence was presented with a clinical precision that forced everyone in the courtroom to revisit the horror of the crime scene. Detailed photographs of the Tefika home, showing the trajectory of the blood spatter and the final resting place of Tefika Sr., were entered into the record. The prosecution emphasized the sheer brutality of the attack, using the medical examiner's findings to highlight the focused nature of the violence. They argued that even within a state of psychosis, the repeated and targeted nature of the stabbing suggested a level of conscious effort that met the legal threshold for serious criminal culpability. The narrative they constructed was one of a young man who had chosen a path of substance abuse, knowing the risks, and had allowed that path to lead him to the ultimate betrayal of the familial bond. They did not shy away from the graphic nature of the injuries, ensuring that the court understood the level of suffering endured by both the deceased father and the critically wounded mother. The defense, conversely, focused their strategy on the concept of the broken machine. They did not attempt to deny the physical acts committed by Tefika Jr., as the evidence made such a denial impossible. Instead, they focused on the internal tragedy of his mental collapse. They brought forward expert testimony to explain the mechanics of a methamphetamine-induced psychotic break, describing it as a total hijacking of the nervous system. The defense argued that at the moment he picked up the knife, Tafika Jr. was no longer the son his parents knew. He was a biological entity reacting to a false reality of extreme terror. They pointed to his lack of any significant prior criminal record and his history as a member of a peaceful, religious household as evidence that this act of violence was an aberration caused entirely by the chemical intervention of the drug. Their goal was to move the court toward a sentence that emphasized psychiatric rehabilitation alongside incarceration, arguing that the true enemy in the case was the substance that had hollowed out a young man's soul. The most profound and agonizing element of the trial was the invisible presence of the survivor. While Tafika Jr.'s mother continued her long and painful recovery, her condition remained a central pillar of the sentencing deliberations. Her survival was a miracle of modern medicine, but her life had been irrevocably altered. The court had to weigh the permanent physical and emotional scars she carried as a direct result of her son's actions. In the culture of American Samoa, where the mother is the heart of the family, the fact that she had been targeted by her own child added a layer of spiritual gravity to the proceedings that transcended standard legal definitions. The prosecution used her suffering to argue for the maximum possible penalty, framing the assault on her as a separate and equally heinous crime that demanded its own measure of justice. The empty chair that she might have occupied served as a silent, powerful witness to the devastation of the Tafika lineage. When the time finally came for the judge to deliver the verdict and the subsequent sentence, a heavy hush fell over the High Court. The judge's remarks reflected the unique and heartbreaking nature of the case, acknowledging that no legal outcome could ever truly restore what had been lost in Leon. The court had to balance the need for public safety and the mandate of the law with the undeniable reality of the defendant's mental state at the time of the crime. The final decision was a reflection of the gravity of parricide and the severity of the assault on the mother. Tafika Jr. was found legally responsible for the death of his father and the life-threatening injuries inflicted upon his mother. The sentence handed down was substantial, ensuring that he would spend a significant portion of his life behind bars, separated from the community he had traumatized. However, the court also included provisions for mental health treatment, recognizing that the prison system alone could not address the underlying pathology of his addiction and the resulting psychosis. The result of the trial provided a sense of legal finality, but it did little to ease the collective burden of the village. For the people of Leon, the sentencing of Tafika Jr. was not a moment of celebration or even of closure. It was simply the official recording of a catastrophe. The legal record now held the cold facts of the case, documenting the what and the how in meticulous detail, but the why continued to haunt the community. The trial had exposed the vulnerability of even the most respected families and the devastating reach of the methamphetamine epidemic. It had shown that the law, while capable of punishing the perpetrator, was powerless to heal the fractured heart of a mother or bring back a father who had been the pillar of his home. The courtroom proceedings served as a public autopsy of a tragedy, revealing the rot of addiction that had festered in the shadows of a peaceful village until it finally erupted in a bloodbath. The sentencing also served as a catalyst for a broader discussion within the territory's judicial and social systems. The case of Tafika Jr. was cited as a primary example of why American Samoa needed more robust drug courts and specialized mental health facilities. The judge's closing comments hinted at a system that was struggling to keep pace with the evolving nature of drug-related violence. The trial highlighted the fact that when mental health issues are ignored due to stigma, the ultimate venue for resolution often becomes a criminal courtroom rather than a hospital. This realization was a bitter pill for the community to swallow, as it suggested that the tragedy in Leon might have been preventable if the barriers of shame and silence had been broken earlier. The legal result was a necessary conclusion to a criminal act, but it was also a stark admission of a societal failure to protect its most vulnerable members from the ravages of synthetic narcotics. As Tafika Jr. was led away from the courtroom to begin serving his sentence, he left behind a legacy of ash. The once honored name of the Tafiga family was now permanently linked to one of the most horrific crimes in the territory's history. The legal process had done its work, the evidence had been weighed, and the judgment had been rendered. Yet, as the spectators filed out of the High Court and back into the humid air of Pago Pago, there was a sense that the true trial was just beginning for the village of Leon. They were left to reconcile the image of the young man they thought they knew with the man described in the prosecution's evidence. They were left to support a surviving mother whose heart was likely as shattered as her body. The trial of Tafiga Jr. ended the legal chapter of the story, but the social and spiritual aftermath would continue to ripple through the islands for generations. A grim reminder that justice, no matter how firmly applied, is often a poor substitute for the peace that was lost on a quiet August night in a village that once believed it was safe. The immediate physical violence of the August night in 2021 eventually ceased, but for the village of Leon, the true devastation was only beginning to settle into the bones of the community. In the weeks and months that followed the arrest of Tafiga Jr., the tropical landscape of American Samoa continued its rhythmic existence. The sun still rose over the volcanic peaks and the Pacific continued to lap at the shores of Tutuila, but the atmosphere within Leon had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a tragedy of this magnitude, a silence that is not peaceful but heavy, laden with the unanswerable questions of an entire people. The Tafiga home, once a beacon of stability and religious devotion, stood as a silent, shattered monument to a nightmare that the village was struggling to process. The physical structure remained, but the spirit that had animated it, the warmth of the patriarch and the nurturing presence of the mother, had been violently extinguished or shattered. The most visceral and ongoing consequence of the tragedy was the long, arduous recovery of the matriarch. Her survival was frequently described as a miracle by the medical staff and the local parishioners, but it was a miracle tempered by unimaginable sorrow. To survive such a brutal physical assault is one thing. To survive the knowledge that the perpetrator was the child you brought into the world and raised with love is a different kind of endurance altogether. As she moved through the stages of medical treatment, the physical scars from the deep knife wounds began to close, but the psychological trauma remained an open, weeping wound. She was a woman who had lost her lifelong partner, her sense of safety, and her son, all in a single, chaotic hour. In the deeply traditional Samoan context, where the family or aiga is the absolute center of one's identity, this loss represented a total annihilation of her world. Her existence became a testament to the devastating collateral damage of methamphetamine, a living reminder that the victims of drug-fueled violence are not just those who die, but those who are left to carry the weight of the wreckage. For the village of Leon itself, the tragedy forced a painful departure from the innocence of the past. For generations, the village had operated on a foundation of communal trust. It was a place where the boundaries between families were porous, where children were raised by the village, and where the sanctity of the home was taken as an absolute given. The massacre within the Tafiga household shattered this illusion of invulnerability. Neighbors who had once looked at the Tafiga home with respect now looked at it with a chilling sense of what if, the realization that such extreme, lethal violence could erupt in the heart of their most respected family caused a ripple of paranoia to spread through the community. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted. The carefree nature of evening walks and communal gatherings was replaced by a new, sharp vigilance. The village had been forced to recognize that the greatest threats to their peace did not always come from the outside world or from known criminals, but could be nurtured in secret behind the closed doors of their own neighbors. The death of Tafiga Sr. left a void in the social and spiritual fabric of Leon that could not be easily filled. As a pillar of the church and a respected elder, his presence had been a stabilizing force in the village. His funeral was not just a family mourning, but a collective grieving for the loss of a moral compass. The eulogies spoken in his honor painted a picture of a man who embodied the highest ideals of the Fa Samoa, the Samoan way: humility, service, and devotion to family. His violent end stood in such grotesque contrast to the peaceful life he had led that it created a sense of spiritual crisis for many in the congregation. How could a man of such faith be taken in such a manner? The tragedy forced the local religious leaders and community elders to confront the limits of their traditional support systems. They had to reckon with the fact that prayer and tradition, while powerful, were sometimes insufficient to combat the chemical onslaught of modern narcotics. This leads to the most significant and haunting legacy of the Leon tragedy, the forced confrontation with the ghost of methamphetamine. For years, the presence of ice in American Samoa had been an open secret, a growing shadow that many chose to ignore out of a sense of shame or a belief that it only affected the fringes of society. The Tufika case stripped away that denial. It proved that no family, no matter how religious, how respected, or how traditional, was immune to the reach of this poison. The case became a catalyst for a territory-wide conversation about the methamphetamine epidemic that was no longer possible to suppress. It forced the government, the police, and the community leaders to acknowledge that the islands were facing a public health crisis that threatened the very foundations of their culture. The term Aisa, the local word for ice, became synonymous with a fear that had finally found to face the vacant, glassy eyes of Tufika Jr. The tragedy highlighted a systemic failure in the way mental health and addiction were handled in the islands. The culture of stigma, which prizes family honor above all else, was shown to have a lethal side effect. By keeping Tufika Jr.'s struggles hidden to protect the family's reputation, the Tufikas had inadvertently allowed a ticking time bomb to remain in their midst without the intervention of professionals. This realization sparked a movement among social advocates in American Samoa to break the silence surrounding mental illness. They began to argue that the true shame was not in having a family member who struggled with addiction, but in the silence that prevented them from getting help. This shift in perspective was slow and painful, but it was a necessary step toward preventing future tragedies. The Leon case became the primary example used in public awareness campaigns to illustrate the terrifying reality of drug-induced psychosis and the urgent need for accessible, stigma-free rehabilitation services. In the years following the event, there was a visible push for policy changes. The government of American Samoa was forced to reevaluate its border security and its internal drug enforcement strategies. The tragedy in Leon served as a grim justification for increased funding for narcotics task forces and the implementation of more stringent penalties for those trafficking methamphetamine. Into the islands, however, the more important changes were happening at the grassroots level. Village councils began to take a more proactive role in identifying and supporting families dealing with substance abuse. The church, which had always been a place of spiritual refuge, began to incorporate education about addiction and mental health into its outreach. The tragedy had taught the community that the only way to protect the sanctity of the village was to bring the shadows into the light. The story of Tufika Jr. himself remains a complex and tragic chapter of the narrative. In the prison system, as the effects of the drugs wore off and the reality of his actions began to settle in, he became a symbol of a lost generation. He was neither a pure villain nor a simple victim, but a human being whose life had been dismantled by a substance designed to destroy. His incarceration served as a form of justice for the law, but it provided little comfort to those who remembered the boy he had once been. His presence in the correctional facility is a permanent reminder of the waste of human potential that addiction represents. He remains a cautionary tale, a living testament to the fact that the path of addiction leads only to the destruction of everything and everyone that matters. As we look back on the tragedy at Leon in 21, we are left with a landscape of profound loss and hard-won wisdom. The village has, in many ways, moved on, but the scars remain visible to those who know where to look. The Tufika home may have new inhabitants or may sit empty, but its history is forever etched into the memory of the village. The story is told to the younger generation not as a ghost story to frighten them, but as a solemn warning about the fragility of peace and the importance of looking out for one another. It is a story about the danger of silence and the destructive power of a drug that respects no boundaries of culture or faith. The ultimate reflection offered by this case is one of empathy and vigilance. We are reminded that the bonds of family are our greatest strength, but they can also be our greatest vulnerability when we refuse to see the truth of a loved one's suffering. The Tefika parents loved their son with a devotion that eventually cost them everything. Their tragedy is a call to action for every community to create systems where love is supported by resources, where faith is complemented by medical understanding, and where no family feels they must face the darkness addiction alone. The blood spilled in Lyon was a sacrifice that the community never wanted to make, but it has become the foundation for a more aware, more proactive, and ultimately more resilient American Samoa. The Pacific rhythm continues in Lyon. The church bells still ring, calling the faithful to prayer. The waves still crash against the volcanic rock, a constant reminder of the raw power of nature. But beneath the surface of this idyllic island life, there is now a deeper understanding of the darkness that can dwell within. The tragedy of the Tefika family is a permanent part of the island's history, a somber melody in the overall song of the village. It serves as a reminder that the work of maintaining peace is never done, and that the protection of this sanctuary requires the courage to speak the truth, even when that truth is painful. As the stars come out over Lyon and the village settles into the quiet of the night, there is a collective prayer not just for the souls of those lost, but for the strength to keep the shadows at bay, ensuring that the peace of the island is never again shattered by the silent rot of the ghost in the machine. This journey through the case of Tefika Jr. concludes not with a sense of closure, but with a lingering, necessary discomfort. We are left to ponder the thin line between a peaceful home and a scene of carnage, a line that can be crossed in a moment of chemical madness. We remember Tefika Sr. for the man he was: a leader, a father, and a man of God. We hold space for the mother who continues to walk the path of survival. And we look toward the future of Lyon and all communities like it, hoping that the lessons learned from this profound tragedy will serve as a shield against the return of such a nightmare. The story of Lyon is a story of a village that lost its innocence but found its voice, a voice that continues to whisper a warning across the waves. Watch over your own. Speak the hidden names of the pain, and never let the silence of shame become the architecture of a tragedy. In the end, the only true defense against the darkness is the light we choose to share with one another, even in our most broken moments. The memory of that night in August 21 remains a heavy, guiding light for a community determined to never let the shadows win again. The final resonance of the Lyon tragedy, years after the sirens have faded and the physical evidence has been archived in the vaults of the High Court, invites us into a space of profound and difficult contemplation that transcends the simple facts of a criminal case. When we look back at the life and sudden, violent death of Tefika Sr. and the harrowing survival of his wife, we are not merely looking at a localized incident of domestic horror in a remote corner of the Pacific. We are looking at a microcosm of a global struggle, a clash between ancient, respected traditions and a modern, synthetic darkness that knows no borders. The case of Tefika Jr. is a stark, undeniable manifestation of what happens when a community's greatest strength sits privacy, its intense familial loyalty, and its commitment to social harmony are weaponized against it by a force it was never designed to understand. The ghost of methamphetamine did not just enter the Tefika home. It exploited the very silence that the village of Lyon had cultivated for generations as a means of protection. This realization is perhaps the most painful legacy of the entire ordeal, forcing a community that prides itself on its resilience to admit that there are some monsters that cannot be prayed away or managed within the confines of the Ida. To truly honor the victims and understand the depth of this tragedy, we must examine the specific architecture of the silence that allowed the situation to reach its terminal point. In many Pacific Island cultures, and specifically within the framework of Samoa, the concept of the family is not just a domestic unit. It is a sacred institution that carries the weight of ancestors and the hopes of future generations. To admit that a member of that institution has fallen into the grip of a substance as degrading and destructive as methamphetamine is perceived as an admission of a fundamental spiritual or moral decay. This is the stigma that acted as a silent accomplice to the violence. The Tefika family, known for their piety and their prominent standing in the church, likely felt an immense, crushing pressure to keep their son's deteriorating mental state a private matter. They were trapped between their love for their child and their duty to their family's reputation, a psychological vice that slowly closed as Tafika Jr.'s psychosis deepened. This dynamic is a recurring theme in isolated communities everywhere, where the fear of judgment from one's neighbors is often greater than the fear of the danger living under one's own roof. The tragedy in Lyon stands as a devastating indictment of this culture of shame, proving that the price of silence can, in the most literal and horrific sense, be blood. Furthermore, we must confront the terrifying biological reality of the drug itself, which served as the primary catalyst for the massacre. Methamphetamine is not a drug of leisure. It is a chemical sledgehammer that systematically dismantles the human capacity for empathy, logic, and self-restraint. When we analyze the actions of Tafika Jr. on that August night, we are looking at the behavior of a biological organism whose primary neurological pathways had been completely rewired by a toxic stimulant. The acute psychotic break described by medical experts is not an excuse for the violence, but it is a necessary explanation for the sheer and mitigated brutality of the attack. It explains why a son who had grown up in a house of peace could suddenly transform into a figure of pure, unadulterated rage. The methamphetamine created a hall of mirrors within his mind, where every loving gesture from his parents was distorted into a lethal threat. This chemical hijacking represents a new and terrifying frontier for traditional societies. It is a form of colonial violence that does not arrive with ships or soldiers, but in small crystalline packets that destroy the mind from the inside out, turning the most sacred of bonds, the one between parent and child, into a theater of slaughter. The survival of the mother in this case is a narrative arc that remains almost too heavy to bear. In the years following the attack, her life has become a testament to a level of human endurance that defies easy categorization. She lives on as a survivor of a tragedy that claimed her husband and essentially took her son as well, leaving her as the solitary keeper of a family legacy that was shattered in a single hour of madness. Her presence in the village of Lyon is a constant, quiet reminder of the stakes involved in the battle against narcotics. She is not just a victim of a crime, she is a victim of a societal blind spot. Her physical recovery, while miraculous, is only a small part of her story. The true labor of her life now is the navigation of a world where her home is no longer a sanctuary and her memories are forever stained by the image of her own child wielding a knife. Her resilience is a powerful, heartbreaking light in the aftermath of the darkness, but it is a light that should never have had to be lit in such a way. She embodies the Hei Chung Sienpo, the warning bell that the prompt mentions, a living signal to all families that the time for hiding and hoping is over. The village of Lyon itself has undergone a profound transformation in its collective identity. The shock of the Tafika case forced a village that was once defined by its historic tranquility to become a village defined by its vigilance. The community leaders and church elders were forced to step out of the comfort of tradition and into the harsh reality of modern social work and drug intervention. This shift represents a difficult but essential evolution. The tragedy taught Lyon that to be a strong community, one must be an open community. It taught them that the health of the village depends on the ability of its members to speak the unspoken, to ask for help when the burden becomes unmanageable, and to recognize that addiction is a medical crisis, not a moral failing. The legacy of the case is seen in the new programs, the increased dialogue, and the slow, painful dismantling of the stigma that once allowed the methamphetamine crisis to fester in the shadows. Lyon is still a village of faith and tradition, but it is now also a village of awareness, carrying its scars as a map to a safer future. When we look at the broader implications for American Samoa and the Pacific at large, the Lyon tragedy serves as a grim milestone. It was the moment when the ghost became visible to everyone. The government's subsequent actions, the tightening of borders, the investment in mental health resources, and the public awareness campaigns were all born from the blood spilled on that August night. The case proved that no amount of geographical isolation can protect society from the global reach of synthetic drugs. It highlighted the urgent need for specialized infrastructure that respects cultural nuances while providing modern clinical care. The tragedy forced a modernization of the territory's approach to public safety, moving away from a purely punitive model toward one that recognizes the complex intersection of substance abuse and psychiatric health. The Topeka case is now a foundational case study in the history of the region, a dark reference point used to ensure that the same mistakes of silence and inaction are never repeated. In the final analysis of this true crime narrative, we must return to the individual human cost. Topeka Sr. was a man of peace who deserved a dignified old age surrounded by the family he had spent his life building. His death was a theft of the most profound order. Topeka Jr., though the perpetrator of an unspeakable act, is also a casualty of a substance that erased his humanity before it led him to destroy his world. The tragedy is absolute because there are no winners. There is only a landscape of varying degrees of loss. As a storyteller, the goal is not to find a silver lining where none exists, but to bear witness to the truth of the event. The truth of Leon is that it was a failure of the systems meant to protect the vulnerable, the family system, the cultural system, and the medical system. By telling this story, we are not just recounting a horror. We are participating in the process of ensuring that the victims are remembered for more than just the manner of their suffering. The podcast script for this case must end with a lingering question for the listener. It is not enough to simply be shocked by the violence or saddened by the grief. We must ask ourselves what shadows are growing in our own communities while we choose to look the other way. The tragedy of Leon is a story about the danger of the perfect facade. It is a story that reminds us that the most important conversations are often the ones we are most afraid to have. As the church bells in Leon continue to ring, they no longer just call the faithful to prayer. They call the community to a state of perpetual watchfulness. They remind the villagers that the peace they cherish is a fragile thing, a garden that must be constantly tended and protected from the weeds of addiction and the rot of shame. The Topeka family, in their ultimate and tragic sacrifice, has given the world a lesson in the high cost of denial. As we conclude this exploration into the events of August 21, we leave the village of Leon in a state of quiet, somber reflection. The Pacific air still carries the scent of salt and tropical flowers, and the waves still beat their rhythmic drum against the shore. The island remains beautiful, but it is a beauty that is now understood to be layered over a complex and sometimes terrifying reality. The story of Topeka Sr. and Jr. is now a permanent part of the island's lore, a narrative thread woven into the fabric of American Samoa. It is a story of blood and belief, of madness and mercy, and of the long, slow journey toward healing. We remember the victims not as statistics in a police report, but as human beings who were caught in a storm they could not escape. And we look to the future with a renewed commitment to the idea that the only way to truly protect our sanctuaries is to make sure they are places of honesty, where no one is forced to suffer in the silence of a respected name. The legacy of Leon is a call to break the silence, to reach out across the barriers of shame, and to ensure that the light of the community is strong enough to reach even the darkest corners of the human heart. In the end, the only true justice for the Topeka family is a world where such a tragedy is never allowed to happen again, a world where the warning bell was heard in time. The silence of Leon has been broken, and in its place is a new, more difficult, but ultimately more hopeful conversation. This is the final word on the tragedy at Leon. Let the memory of the lost be the guardian of those who remain. The finality of a tragedy like the one that decimated the Topeka family in the village of Leon is rarely found in the slamming of a prison door or the final gavel of a high court judge. Instead, the true finality resides in the long, quiet years that follow, when the sensational headlines have faded from the local newspapers and the rest of the world has turned its attention to the next unfolding crisis. In the small, interconnected ecosystem of American Samoa, the echo of that August night in 2021 continues to vibrate through the air. A low-frequency hum of sorrow that refuses to be silenced by the simple passage of time. To walk through the streets of Leon today is to walk through a landscape that is physically identical to the one that existed before the massacre, yet emotionally unrecognizable to those who lived through the transition. The tropical sun still casts its unforgiving light on the volcanic soil, and the salt air still carries the scent of the sea. But there is a profound, invisible scar on the collective psyche of the village. The Tafika home, once a vibrant center of faith and community, remains a silent witness to the capacity for human darkness. Its walls holding the secrets of a family that was destroyed by a poison it never saw coming. For the mother, the sole survivor of the physical assault, the concept of a conclusion is an impossibility. Her life is now divided into two distinct and irreconcilable epochs: the decades spent building a sanctuary of peace with her husband, and the remaining years spent navigating the wreckage left behind by her son. Her survival is a testament to the resilience of the human body, but her daily existence is a testament to the burden of the human spirit. She lives in the profound, echoing space where a family used to be. In the traditional Samoan context, where a woman's identity is so deeply intertwined with her role as a wife and a mother, she has been forced into a state of existential exile. She is a widow who lost her partner to a violence that is incomprehensible, and she is a mother whose son is both the victim of a chemical plague and the perpetrator of a monstrous crime. This duality is a weight that no amount of communal support or religious solace can fully alleviate. She represents the most painful aspect of the Leon tragedy, the living casualty who must find a way to breathe in the vacuum created by a drug-fueled explosion. The physical absence of Tafika Sr. is a wound that the village of Leon continues to probe with a sense of disbelief. In a community where elders are the repositories of wisdom and the anchors of social stability, his violent removal was akin to uprooting an ancient tree that provided shade for everyone. His death was not just a loss for his immediate family. It was a loss of history and a loss of safety. The village church, where he was once a constant and respected presence, now holds a space that feels perpetually empty. His life was a long, steady climb toward a respected old age, a climb that was supposed to end in the peaceful embrace of his community and his faith. The fact that it ended instead in a frenzied, bloody struggle in his own living room is a reality that the elders of Leon still struggle to reconcile with their worldview. It has forced a reevaluation of the concept of safety in the islands, leading to a grim realization that the traditional structures of respect and authority are no match for the erratic, lethal impulses of a mind destroyed by synthetic narcotics. Meanwhile, in the correctional facilities of American Samoa, Tafika Jr. exists as a ghost of the man he might have been. His incarceration is a necessary act of public safety and legal justice, but it offers no real resolution to the underlying crisis of his addiction and mental collapse. As the chemical fog of methamphetamine slowly lifted during his first years of confinement, he was likely left to confront the staggering magnitude of his actions with a brain that remained permanently altered by the drug. This is the hidden tragedy of ice in the Pacific. It does not just cause a temporary break from reality. It often leaves behind a fractured consciousness that must live with the memory of horrors it committed while it was away. His life is now a long, claustrophobic meditation on a single hour of madness. He serves as a tragic symbol of a generation of young men in the islands who have been hollowed out by a substance that offers a fleeting escape but demands a total sacrifice of their humanity. His presence in the prison system is a constant, expensive reminder of a societal failure to intervene before the point of no return. The broader societal impact of the Leon massacre has been a slow-motion awakening for the territory. The ghost of methamphetamine, which once haunted only the shadows of the community, has been dragged into the center of the public square. The tragedy forced the government and the people to move beyond the stage of denial and into a state of active, if difficult, engagement with the drug epidemic. There has been a push for more robust border controls as the islands realize their vulnerability to international trafficking routes. There has been an increase in the visibility of mental health services, though the struggle against the deep-seated cultural stigma remains a formidable barrier. The case of the Tafika family is cited in every legislative hearing and community meeting regarding substance abuse, a grim benchmark used to illustrate the high price of inaction. However, despite the policy changes and the increased awareness, the supply of the drug continues to trickle into the islands a reminder that the war against synthetic narcotics is a marathon, not a sprint, and that the stakes are nothing less than the survival of the traditional family structure. The village of Lyon has had to find a way to integrate this horror into its long and proud history. For a place that prides itself on being a landing site for the light of the gospel, the darkness of 21 was a jarring contradiction. The community has had to learn how to mourn a victim while simultaneously grappling with the fact that the killer was one of their own. This process has led to a more nuanced, if more somber, understanding of the human condition. The village is no longer the innocent sanctuary it once believed itself to be. It is a place that has seen the absolute worst of what can happen when addiction and mental illness are left to fester in the silence of a respected home. This hard-won wisdom is the only positive outcome of the tragedy, a shield that the village now carries to protect the next generation. They have learned that the strength of a family is not measured by its ability to hide its problems, but by its courage to face them in the light. The spiritual reckoning within the local church has also been profound. For a community that relies so heavily on faith to make sense of the world, the Lyon tragedy was a challenge to the very foundations of their belief. The clergy and the parishioners have had to find a way to offer comfort to a mother whose grief is so complex it defies standard prayers. They have had to address the presence of evil not as an abstract theological concept, but as a tangible, chemical reality that can walk into a home and destroy it in minutes. This has led to a more practical, interventionist form of ministry, where spiritual guidance is increasingly paired with an awareness of the psychological and medical realities of addiction. The church has had to become a place where people feel safe enough to admit their struggles with drugs and mental health, a shift that is essential for the long-term health of the community. As we reach the final pages of this true crime narrative, we are left with a series of images that refuse to fade. We see the peaceful village of Lyon, its beauty a mask for a lurking danger. We see the Tafika home, once a place of prayer, now a place of memory. We see a father whose life of integrity was ended by a senseless act of violence. We see a mother who continues to walk a path of unimaginable sorrow with a dignity that is nothing short of heroic. And we see a son whose identity was erased by a crystalline poison, leaving behind a shell of a man who must live with the wreckage of his own family. These images form a mosaic of a tragedy that is as much about the failure of a society to protect its own as it is about the criminal actions of an individual. The story of the Tafika family is a warning that echoes across the Pacific. It tells us that the traditional bonds that hold our communities together are being tested by new and predatory forces. It tells us that the price of stigma is a life and death matter. And it tells us that the only way to truly honor the victims of such a tragedy is to ensure that their suffering leads to a real and lasting change in how we perceive and treat the twin crises of addiction and mental illness. The silence that once protected the reputation of the Tafika family ended in a scream that was heard around the islands. That scream must not be forgotten. It must be the catalyst for a world where no other family is forced to endure the same fate. The podcast series on the Lyon tragedy concludes not with a sense of satisfaction that justice has been served, but with a heavy heart for all that was lost. We have reconstructed the events of that August night, we have followed the investigation, and we have witnessed the legal proceedings. But the why remains a haunting mystery of the human mind and the destructive power of modern chemicals. We are left with the realization that justice is a cold comfort in the face of such absolute loss. The true work of the community is not in the courtroom, but in the homes, the churches, and the streets of Lyon, where the slow work of healing and prevention continues every day. As the sun sets over the western coast of Tutuila, casting long shadows over the historic village of Lyon, we remember Tafika Sr. We remember him for the life he lived, not just the way he died. We remember him as a man of faith, a man of peace, and a man who loved his family with a devotion that remained steadfast until the very end. And we hold a space for the mother, whose resilience is the only light in this dark story. We hope that her journey toward peace is supported by a community that has finally learned to listen, to speak, and to act. The tragedy of Lyon is a part of her, and it is now a part of us. The final word on this case is one of vigilance. We must watch over our neighbors, we must support our families, and we must never let the fear of shame prevent us from seeking the help that can save a life. The ghost of methamphetamine is still out there, lurking in the shadows of the islands, waiting for the next opportunity to exploit the silence. But the village of Leon is no longer silent. They have told their story, and in doing so, they have given us the tools to prevent the next tragedy. The peace of Leon is now a hard-won peace, a peace that is guarded by the memory of the Tufiga family. May their story be a shield for us all, and may the islands find a way to banish the ghost once and for all, ensuring that the only bells heard in the night are the ones calling the faithful to a sanctuary that is truly safe. This is the end of the narrative, but the beginning of a new chapter of awareness and hope for a territory that has seen the darkness and chosen to reach for the light. The ultimate legacy of the tragedy that unfolded within the quiet. Volcanic embrace of Leon is not found in the legal archives of the High Court or the sterilized reports of the Narcotics Task Force, but in the profound, silent shift in the collective soul of the village. As we reach the final stage of this narrative journey into the heart of the Tufiga family disaster, we are forced to move beyond the sequence of the attack and the mechanics of the trial to confront the enduring, haunting echoes that remain. In the years following the year 2021, the historic village of Leon has become a place defined by a new kind of awareness. A community that has looked directly into the abyss of modern synthetic destruction and survived to tell a story of shattered innocence. This final reflection is not just about the crime itself, but about the way a tragedy of this magnitude alters the very frequency of life in a small island territory. The sun still casts its long, golden shadows across the Leon coastline, and the tropical trade winds still rustle through the palms. But the atmosphere is forever marked by the memory of a night when the most sacred of bonds, the one between a father, a mother, and their son, was violently, chemically severed. To understand the depth of the aftermath, one must consider the specific cultural weight of the empty chair in a Samoan household like that of the Tufigas. In a society where the patriarch, the father, serves as the spiritual and social anchor of the lineage, the loss of Tufiga Sr. was more than a domestic tragedy. It was an existential blow to the village hierarchy. He was a man who represented the old world, a world where the church, the family, and the village council were sufficient to maintain peace and order. His sudden and brutal removal at the hands of his own flesh and blood sent a message to every family in American Samoa that the old ways of protection are no longer absolute. The safe haven that the islands once prided themselves on has been breached by a force that does not respect the traditions of the elders or the sanctity of the home. This realization has left a permanent sense of vulnerability in Leon, a quiet, lingering anxiety that even the most respected and religious of households can be dismantled from within by the invisible rod of addiction. The survival of the mother, lying at the intersection of unimaginable grief and miraculous resilience, remains the most poignant symbol of this entire ordeal. Her life is a testament to a strength that is both quiet and devastating. In the wake of the massacre, she has had to navigate a reality that no human being is prepared for. The task of mourning a husband while simultaneously grappling with the fact that his killer is the very child she nurtured and protected. Her presence in the community serves as a living Chun Sient bell, a warning bell that rings with every step she takes. She is the embodiment of the collateral damage caused by the methamphetamine epidemic. A victim who survived the blade but must now live with the psychological wreckage of a family line that was effectively ended in a single hour of drug-fueled madness. Her resilience is not a sign that the pain has lessened, but a sign that the spirit of the islands continues to endure even when the foundations have been shaken to their core. Central to this final synthesis is the ghost that the prompt describes, the spectral, destructive presence of methamphetamine that has infiltrated the closed communities of the Pacific. This substance is not merely a narcotic. It is a profound disruptor of the social fabric. In Leon, the tragedy of Tufiga Jr. exposed the terrifying reality that this ghost exploits the very qualities that make island life beautiful: the privacy, the loyalty to family, and the desire to protect one's reputation. by choosing silence over intervention, by choosing to hide the son's deterioration to save the family's honor. The Tufiga family unknowingly provided the perfect environment for the methamphetamine psychosis to reach its lethal apex. This is the lesson that Leon has been forced to learn at a staggering price. The ghost thrives in the darkness of stigma, and the only way to banish it is to bring the struggle into the light of public discourse and medical intervention. The tragedy has forced a modernization of the village's collective conscience, pushing them to recognize that the preservation of life must always take precedence over the preservation of an image. As we look at the broader implications for the territory of American Samoa, the Leon case stands as a permanent marker in the history of public health and safety. It was the moment when the community realized that the ice epidemic was not a problem confined to the fringes of society, but a crisis that could strike the very heart of the establishment. The government's subsequent efforts to tighten border controls and invest in mental health resources are direct responses to the blood spilled in the Tufiga living room. However, the most significant change is the slow, agonizing dismantling of the taboo surrounding mental illness and substance abuse. More families are now finding the courage to seek help before the point of no return, driven by the memory of what happened when the Tufigas chose to face the storm alone. The massacre in Leon has become a grim reference point, a story told in hushed tones to ensure that the same mistakes of silence and denial are never repeated by the next generation. The character of Tufiga Jr. himself remains a haunting figure in this narrative, a man who became a monster not through a defect of the soul, but through the chemical destruction of his brain. His incarceration is a necessary act of justice, but it offers no real sense of victory or closure. He exists as a cautionary tale of a life wasted and a lineage destroyed. In the quiet of his confinement, as the drugs have long since left his system, he is left to face the staggering magnitude of his actions with a mind that is now a prison of its own making. His tragedy is a reminder that the path of methamphetamine is a one-way street toward total annihilation, leaving behind nothing but ash and regret. He is a victim of his own choices, but he is also a symbol of a failure of the support systems that should have caught him before he picked up the knife. The village of Leon, in its quiet dignity, continues to move forward, but it does so with a limp. The church bells still call the faithful to prayer, and the evening air still carries the songs of the village youth, but there is a depth of understanding now that was not there before 21. The community has seen the absolute worst of what can happen, and in doing so, they have found a new kind of strength. They have learned that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the courage to face the darkness together. The memory of Tufiga Sr. is honored not just through memorials, but through the increased vigilance of his neighbors and the renewed commitment of the village to protect its vulnerable members. His death was a sacrifice that the community never wanted to make, but it has become the foundation for a more resilient and aware Leon. In the world of true crime, we often look for a resolution, a neat ending where the guilty are punished and the innocent find peace. But the story of the Leon tragedy offers no such simplicity. It is a story of extreme violence and extreme contrast, a narrative that leaves the listener with a profound sense of the fragility of our shared reality. It reminds us that the line between a peaceful Sunday morning and a horrific crime scene is thinner than we care to admit, often held together only by the health of our minds and the strength of our social safety nets. The tragedy of the Tufigas is a mirror held up to every community, asking us what we are willing to see and what we are choosing to ignore. It is a call to break the cycles of stigma and to recognize the ghosts in our own midst before they manifest in violence. As the waves of the Pacific continue to beat against the volcanic shores of Leon, they carry away the physical traces of the tragedy, but the emotional truth remains. The story of the Tufiga family is now a permanent part of the island's lore, a somber melody that will be sung for generations. It is a story of a respected father who died in his own home, a mother who survived the unthinkable, and a son who lost himself in a chemical fog. It is a story that ends not with an answer, but with a lingering, necessary discomfort. We are left to ponder the cost of reputation and the value of truth. We are left to honor the victims by refusing to look away from the causes of their suffering. And we are left to hope that the light of awareness in American Samoa will eventually grow strong enough to banish the ghost of methamphetamine once and for all. The final image of this narrative is one of the Leon coastline at dusk. The beauty of the islands is undeniable, a tropical paradise that seems removed from the horrors of the modern world. But as the light fades and the stars begin to appear over the Pacific, we remember that even in paradise, there is darkness. We remember that the true strength of a community is found in its ability to support its members through the night. The village of Leon has seen the darkness, and it has chosen to reach for the light. The silence of the Tafiga home has been replaced by a new, more difficult conversation, a conversation about health, about addiction, and about the courage to be honest. This is the ultimate legacy of the tragedy, a village that is no longer afraid to see the truth, and a community that is determined to ensure that the peace they cherish is a peace built on a foundation of reality, not silence. The story of Leon is finished, but the work of healing and prevention continues, a rhythmic, ceaseless effort as constant as the ocean waves themselves. In the end, we are left with the silence of the village's silence that is now filled with the wisdom of those who have survived the storm and the memory of those who were lost to the shadows. The alarm has been sounded, the bells have rung, and the village of Leon watches the horizon, ready for a new dawn. The finality of a tragedy like the one that decimated the Tafiga family in the historic village of Leon is rarely found in the slamming of a prison door or the final gavel of a high court judge. Instead, the true finality resides in the long, quiet years that follow, when the sensational headlines have faded from the local newspapers and the rest of the world has turned its attention to the next unfolding crisis. In the small, interconnected ecosystem of American Samoa, the echo of that August night in the year 2021 continues to vibrate through the air. A low-frequency hum of sorrow that refuses to be silenced by the simple passage of time. To walk through the streets of Leon today is to walk through a landscape that is physically identical to the one that existed before the massacre, yet emotionally unrecognizable to those who lived through the transition. The tropical sun still casts its unforgiving light on the volcanic soil, and the salt air still carries the scent of the sea, but there is a profound, invisible scar on the collective psyche of the village. The Tafiga home, once a vibrant center of faith and community, remains a silent witness to the capacity for human darkness, its walls holding the secrets of a family that was destroyed by a poison it never saw coming. This concluding chapter of the Leon narrative requires us to look beyond the individual actors and consider the broader sociological and spiritual landscape that remains. The tragedy of Tafiga Jr. and his parents was not an isolated malfunction of a single household. It was a symptom of a much larger, encroaching ghost that has been haunting the Pacific for years. Methamphetamine, the synthetic catalyst for this entire disaster, represents a new and terrifying frontier for traditional island societies. It is a substance that does not merely alter the user's perception. It fundamentally dismantles the cultural and familial structures that have sustained these communities for centuries. In Leon, the Tafiga family was the epitome of these structures. They were churchgoers, respected elders, and a symbol of the peaceful, law-abiding Samoan way of life. The fact that the ghost could penetrate such a sanctuary is the most chilling takeaway for the entire territory. It proved that no amount of religious devotion or community standing could provide a perfect shield against the chemical volatility of modern narcotics. The survival of the mother, the matriarch who faced the unthinkable violence of her own son, remains the most poignant and difficult element of the aftermath. Her life is now a testament to a level of resilience that is almost impossible to comprehend. She exists in the profound, echoing space where a family used to be, carrying the physical and psychological weight of a night that redefined her existence. In the deeply traditional Samoan context, where the family is the absolute center of one's identity, her loss is total. She is a widow who lost her partner to an act of extreme violence, and she is a mother whose child has become a symbol of a community's nightmare. Her recovery is not a destination but a journey through a landscape of grief, a journey she performs under the watchful, sympathetic, and often fearful eyes of her neighbors. She has become the Hiai Chung Sienchpao, the living warning bell that the prompt mentions, a constant reminder that the silence of shame can lead to the most devastating of consequences. Her presence in Leon is a silent plea to other families to break the cycle of secrecy before the ghost in the machine consumes them as well. For the village of Leon itself, the tragedy forced a painful departure from the innocence of the past. For generations, the village had operated on a foundation of communal trust. It was a place where the boundaries between families were porous, where children were raised by the village, and where the sanctity of the home was taken as an absolute given. The massacre within the Tafiga household shattered this illusion of invulnerability. Neighbors who had once looked at the Tafiga home with respect now looked at it with a chilling sense of what might have been done differently. The realization that such extreme, lethal violence could erupt in the heart of their most respected family caused a ripple of paranoia to spread through the community. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted. The carefree nature of evening walks and communal gatherings was replaced by a new, sharp vigilance. The village had been forced to recognize that the greatest threats to their peace did not always come from the outside world or from known criminals, but could be nurtured in secret behind the closed doors of their own neighbors. The death of Tafiga Sr. left a void in the social and spiritual fabric of Leon that could not be easily filled. As a pillar of the church and a respected elder, his presence had been a stabilizing force in the village. His funeral was not just a family mourning, but a collective grieving for the loss of a moral compass. The eulogies spoken in his honor painted a picture of a man who embodied the highest ideals of the Samoan way of life: humility, service, and devotion to family. His violent end stood in such grotesque contrast to the peaceful life he had led that it created a sense of spiritual crisis for many in the congregation. The tragedy forced the local religious leaders and community elders to confront the limits of their traditional support systems. They had to reckon with the fact that prayer and tradition, while powerful, were sometimes insufficient to combat the chemical onslaught of modern narcotics. This realization led to a slow but necessary modernization of the church's role in the community, moving toward a more active and informed involvement in issues of mental health and addiction. The broader societal impact of the Leon massacre has been a slow-motion awakening for the entire territory of American Samoa. The ghost of methamphetamine, which once haunted only the shadows of the community, was dragged into the center of the public square by the sheer brutality of the Tafiga case. The tragedy forced the government and the people to move beyond the stage of denial and into a state of active engagement with the drug epidemic. There has been a push for more robust border controls and an increase in the visibility of mental health services, though the struggle against the deep-seated cultural stigma remains a formidable barrier. The case of the Tafiga family is now cited in every legislative hearing and community meeting regarding substance abuse, a grim benchmark used to illustrate the high price of inaction. The territory has had to learn that the protection of the family requires more than just tradition. It requires a proactive, medical, and social intervention that acknowledges the realities of the 21st century. In the final analysis of this true crime narrative, we must return to the concept of the extreme contrast that defined the case. This was a crime born of pure, unadulterated chaos, occurring in a setting characterized by extreme order and peace. The horror of the night in August 21 was amplified by the reputation of the family involved. If it could happen to the Tafigas, the people of American Samoa realized it could happen to anyone. This realization is the true legacy of the Leon tragedy. It is a story that ends not with a sense of satisfaction that justice has been served, but with a heavy heart for all that was lost. We have reconstructed the events, we have followed the investigation, and we have witnessed the legal proceedings. But the why remains a haunting mystery of the human mind and the destructive power of synthetic chemicals. We are left with the realization that justice is a cold comfort in the face of such absolute loss. The true work of the community is not in the courtroom, but in the homes and the hearts of the people who must ensure that such a nightmare never returns. As the sun sets over the western coast of Tutuila, casting long, bruised shadows over the historic village of Leon, we are reminded that the peace of the island is a fragile thing. The church bells still ring, calling the faithful to prayer, and the ocean waves still beat their rhythmic drum against the volcanic rock. But beneath the surface of this idyllic island life, there is now a deeper understanding of the darkness that can dwell within. The tragedy of the Tefega family is a permanent part of the island's history, a somber melody in the overall song of the village. It serves as a reminder that the work of maintaining peace is never done, and that the protection of this sanctuary requires the courage to speak the truth, even when that truth is painful. The silence of Leon has been broken, and in its place is a new, more difficult, but ultimately more hopeful conversation about health, safety, and the survival of the family. The story of case number 6, the tragedy at Leon Village, concludes with a lingering, necessary discomfort. We are left to ponder the thin line between a peaceful home and a scene of carnage, a line that was crossed in a moment of chemical madness. We remember Tefega Sr. for the man he was: a leader, a father, and a man of faith. We hold space for the mother who continues to walk the path of survival with a dignity that is nothing short of heroic. And we look toward the future of Leon and all communities like it, hoping that the lessons learned from this profound tragedy will serve as a shield against the return of the ghost. The legacy of the Tefegas is a call to break the silence, to reach out across the barriers of shame, and to ensure that the light of the community is strong enough to reach even the darkest corners of the human heart. In the end, the only true justice for the Tefega family is a world where such a tragedy is never allowed to happen again. A world where the warning bell was heard in time and the silence was broken before the first blow was struck. The memory of that night in August 21 remains a heavy, guiding light for a territory determined to never let the shadows win again, ensuring that the peaceful reputation of Leon is guarded by the wisdom of those who survived the storm. This is the final word on the Leon tragedy, a story of blood and belief, of madness and mercy, and of the long, slow journey toward a hard-won peace that is no longer built on silence. The final chapter of the Tefega tragedy in the historic village of Leon is not merely a conclusion to a criminal file, but a profound and necessary contemplation on the enduring power of truth in the face of absolute devastation. As we look back from the vantage point of several years since that horrific night in August 2021, the story of Tefega Jr. and his parents has transcended the boundaries of a local news item to become a permanent, somber landmark in the collective memory of the South Pacific. The waves that continue to break against the volcanic shores of Leon carry with them the weight of a narrative that challenged every assumption about the safety of the home, the sanctity of the family bond, and the resilience of a traditional culture against the encroaching tide of modern synthetic narcotics. This final movement of our exploration is dedicated to the legacy of that suffering, focusing on how a community that was once defined by its silence has found a way to speak the unspeakable, transforming a scene of slaughter into a sanctuary of awareness and a catalyst for systemic change. The passage of time has done little to diminish the sheer, visceral impact of the shock of contrast that defined this case. In the world of true crime, we often encounter stories of violence emerging from environments of neglect, poverty, or long-standing criminality. But the Tefega case was different. It was an eruption of extreme brutality from the very heart of the establishment. The Tefega family was the ideal, the standard-bearer for the Samoan way of life, characterized by a deep, unwavering commitment to the church and the community. This contrast is what made the tragedy so uniquely terrifying for the people of American Samoa. It suggested that if the ghost of methamphetamine could dismantle a home as fortified by faith and respectability as the Tefegas, then no household in the territory was truly safe. This realization forced a fundamental shift in the island's self-perception. The idyllic image of the peaceful village, shielded from the chaos of the outside world by its isolation and its traditions, was revealed to be a fragile construct. The violence of 21 proved that the greatest threats were no longer on the horizon, but were already inside the walls, growing in the shadows of the very respectability that families worked so hard to maintain. At the center of this transformation is the survivor, the mother whose endurance has become the moral compass for the entire village. Her life in the years following the attack has been a testament to a level of courage that defies standard description. She is the living bridge between the world that was lost and the world that must now be built. Every day of her survival is a victory over the darkness that attempted to claim her entire lineage. Her presence in Lyon is a constant, quiet reminder that the cost of silence is far greater than the cost of shame. In the early months after the tragedy, the village was paralyzed by a sense of collective guilt, a feeling that they should have seen the signs, that they should have intervened. But through her resilience, she has guided the community away from futile self-blame and toward a proactive form of vigilance. She has become the embodiment of the Hei Chung Sienshbo, the warning bell that rings not to incite fear, but to inspire protection. Her story has taught Lyon that the only way to honor the memory of Tafiga Sr. is to ensure that no other patriarch is ever placed in a position where he must face a chemical storm alone. And unarmed. The ghost of methamphetamine, the silent rod that triggered the massacre, has finally been brought into the full light of day. For decades, the presence of ice in the islands was treated as a source of familial embarrassment, a secret to be kept behind closed doors to protect the family's honor. The Tafiga case shattered that taboo permanently. It provided a graphic, undeniable illustration of the drug's capacity to induce acute psychosis, turning a loving son into a lethal entity. This has led to a revolutionary change in how the community perceives addiction. It is no longer viewed as a simple moral failing to be addressed by discipline and prayer alone, but as a severe medical and psychiatric crisis that requires professional intervention. The village of Lyon, once a place where reputation was everything, has begun to prioritize the survival of its youth over the preservation of its image. This shift in the collective consciousness is perhaps the most significant legacy of the tragedy, representing a modernization of the Samoan social contract that acknowledges the terrifying realities of 21st century narcotics. Furthermore, the legal and social structures of American Samoa have been forced to evolve in the shadow of this case. The judicial proceedings against Tafiga Jr. were a watershed moment for the territory's legal system, highlighting the urgent need for a more nuanced approach to crimes committed under the influence of extreme drug-induced psychosis. The trial exposed the limitations of a purely punitive model when dealing with individuals whose brains have been chemically hijacked. This has sparked ongoing debates about the implementation of drug courts and specialized mental health facilities that can provide intervention long before a situation escalates into violence. The Hei Chung Sienshbo has reached the halls of government, leading to increased funding for border security to stem the flow of methamphetamine and a renewed focus on community-based mental health resources. The tragedy in Lyon was the catalyst for a realization that the safety of the islands depends on a robust, integrated response that combines the strength of tradition with the precision of modern medicine and law enforcement. The role of the church in Lyon has also undergone a profound and necessary transformation. In the immediate aftermath of the killings, the religious community was left reeling, struggling to reconcile their faith with the sheer, senseless brutality of the event. But out of that spiritual crisis has emerged a more compassionate and practical form of ministry. The local church leaders have recognized that they cannot simply pray away the effects of synthetic narcotics. They have begun to incorporate education about addiction and mental health into their outreach, turning the church into a place where families can seek help without the fear of judgment. This represents a healing of the breach between faith and science, a recognition that protecting the flock requires an understanding of the biological wolves that threaten it. The memory of Tafiga Sr., a man of deep faith, is now honored through a church that is more aware, more active, and more supportive of those struggling in the shadows. As we conclude this narrative, we are left with the image of Lyon as it is today, a village that is still beautiful, still historic, and still deeply connected to its roots, but a village that is now wiser and more watchful. The silence that once characterized the Tafiga home has been replaced by a new, more difficult, but ultimately more hopeful conversation. The tragedy of 21 is not a secret to be hidden, but a lesson to be shared. It is a story of a family that was destroyed by a poison it did not understand, and a community that found its voice in the wreckage. The extreme violence of the night in August has been answered by an extreme commitment to the truth. Lyon has taught us that the only true sanctuary is one built on honesty, where the bonds of family are reinforced by the courage to face the darkness together. The ultimate word on the Tafika case is one of empathy and action. We remember the victims as human beings whose lives were a testament to the best of their culture and whose deaths became a catalyst for its survival. We look at Tafika Jr. not as a monster, but as a tragic reminder of what happens when a mind is lost to a chemical plague. And we look at the mother as a hero of our time, a woman who carried the burden of a territory's awakening on her shoulders. The bells of Leon continue to ring across the water, but their sound has changed. They no longer just call the faithful to worship. They call the islands to a state of perpetual vigilance. They remind us that the work of protecting our families is never finished, and that the light of awareness must be kept burning in every home. The story of Leon is a story of blood and belief, but it is ultimately a story of the victory of truth over the ghost in the machine. May the memory of that night serve as a shield for every family in the Pacific, ensuring that the peace they cherish is a peace that is truly, permanently safe. This is the end of the narrative, a journey through the darkness that has led us, finally, to the hard-won light of a new and more resilient day. The silence is broken, the warning has been heard, and the village of Leon stands ready, a guardian of its people and a witness to the enduring power of the human spirit to find meaning in the midst of the most profound tragedy.